And we're live. Ivor, welcome back to the podcast, man.
Oh, thank you very much. And sure, welcome back to the podcast. You've been away for a while.
I have, yeah. I certainly have, and I've come up with. Oh fuck! It's a weird one because I've spent the last 2 years coming up with excuses why not to do the podcast, but I spent the previous 2 years telling everybody how not to be full of excuses and to get out of your own way. So yeah, I've been a bit of a hypocrite for the past 2 years, but I've been busy too. I got married and had another kid. And
they keep you busy.
Yeah, even those two things, like fuck that in life and everything else. But what's changed with you since we last sat down? Have you still, is Psychedelics this thing you did a couple of years ago? You went to the jungle, it was mad, you were on a podcast about it, and now, reality is hit home, and you're just, you're back to normal.
Back working in the office, don't believe in God, don't believe in any of that stuff, No, things are, I guess my thoughts and my feelings on it are still exactly the same, and it's definitely still a massive part of my life, and a huge interest in my life still, as I think I might have even said to you before, I can't ever see that changing, because to me, when you're shown the divine, or you're shown whatever it is you're shown, there's no switching that back off, and there certainly hasn't been for me. That is constantly in my daily thoughts. It's still every day I wake up, I think about Peru, I think about the things I've done there, the things I've seen there, and it influences my life. It definitely keeps me on the straight and narrow, for sure. It stops me from, overindulging, not to say I don't indulge, but overindulging in the vices. And when I do overindulge at times, it's always the thing that brings me back out is, to think about that kind of experience out there, and to try and, keep myself healthy again, as in, eating well, training, all of that kind of thing. It's always what brings me out of, when you get dragged into that, not eating well and not training and all of that. It's my thoughts of all of them things that happened in the jungle. So it's always going to be a part of my life, I think. I can't see that stopping in any way.
Well, why do you keep slipping out of it, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's just human nature. It's just human nature. I tend to view life as, or I've started to kind of view life as a meditation itself. So the idea of sitting down and just meditating is one thing, but if I've begun to treat my life like a meditation, so when I'm eating healthy and I'm living my healthy lifestyle, that's me breathing in, and then obviously you slip and on the breathe out, you're not doing them things. But I would kind of think of it as, if the whole thing is a game, if this whole thing is a game, like I kind of would not understand, but think that it is, the game is a constant remembering, and a game a constant forgetting. And the beauty about the forgetting is that you get to remember the whole thing again, and you get to experience, that kind of feeling like I felt in the jungle before. There's times when I would feel, again, for that word, I would feel very spiritual, where I'm connected to everything and everything's healthy and everything's good. And then there's times when I don't feel like that, and I am, indulging in the vices, and I don't feel very spiritual. And when I'm in them times, something will re-trigger that in me. And I think that's what's so beautiful about the game, is that you get to remember a number of times. You don't just have an experience like I had in the jungle and that's it, because it would all become again quite mundane again, wouldn't it? Like if that was your only experience. So by forgetting the whole situation again, you get to relearn it, and you get that spark again, because it's exciting when that spark hits you, as you found yourself with the use of the psychedelics and things like that now. Like when you have them experiences, like it's certainly for them couple of months afterwards, you're floating around, really, aren't you? Like your mindset's in a good place, your life is definitely very healthy and all that again, so you slip in and out of that. But to me, I think that's a good thing. And as I said, I nearly treat it now and understand it like it's a meditation. Like there's always going to be them times when I'm feeling spiritual, and then there's not, and then it's going to rise and fall, and it's like an in and an out breath and a flow. That's how I would look at it, I suppose.
And what do you think triggers you, for want of a better term, into staying away from the kind of more spiritual, enlightened path where you're at one with yourself and your family and things are kind of good in your life? Like, what do you think derails you?
You get lost in, I guess, what the Hindus would call what the Hindus would call Maya, so the illusion. When I notice that I kind of slip off that spiritual path is when I kind of buy back into the illusion, more or less. Like, say for instance, lately I've been doing a lot of work on the outside of my house, and that took over everything. So I was trying to get the money together for it. I was working hard to try and pay for it, and I was buying back into the whole illusion again of having to get the land done and get this done and get that done. And it's usually in them instances when I don't feel so connected to spirit or whatever, whatever word you want to use for it, but it would usually be that would kind of take me out of that kind of feeling and out of that kind of place that I'm in. I buy back into the madness of life, like, do you know what I mean? That illusion, you kind of forget who you are. And I think that, again, that's the beauty of the game, is that you get to remember that again, and it's like, it's like the peace and the tranquility settles back in again, and then you buy back into the illusion again. So it's a constant game of remembering and forgetting, remembering and forgetting. And I think that's what makes the game so beautiful, because if you just remembered and that was it, you wouldn't have that coming down to come back up again. Everything would nearly plateau, wouldn't it? Like, it'd be just, that the whole time, like. But it's nice to forget and remember at the same time.
No, without a doubt. And I think a big one for me was when COVID hit and the lockdown was imposed. My business just came to a complete standstill. I was supplying restaurants, so all the restaurants were closed, so I closed.
Right.
Let the two boys go, and the business just turned the key, turn off the lights for whatever amount of months it was. But it gave me a lot of time to think about what I had been doing in the months leading up to that. And the reason I set up my own business and wanted to work for myself in the first place was because I wanted to remove myself from the rat race, from the 9 to 5, living for the weekend, to saving up enough money so that you might be able to retire early. That whole illusion. The reason I wanted to set up my own business was to get out of that. And what COVID showed me was what I had done along the way was I had built up my own rat race that I now owned, but I was still in the rat race.
Yeah.
Do you know that kind of way?
Yeah.
And I was a worse boss to myself than my previous employers have been.
Right.
Insofar as that, like, me as a boss of myself, I was never happy with my own output, so I was kind of constantly giving out to myself. Right. Kind of way. But it wasn't until I got the break of COVID that I actually kind of realised that. But that's essentially what you're saying, is just slipping back into old patterns or old habits, or I suppose conformity, or what's easy. Like, that path is already very much kind of laid out for most people. You don't choose it as much as you just kind of flow into it. And I think schools and primary schools, secondary schools, even creches, preschool care, primary school care, secondary school, even colleges and universities, all funnel you into specific channels of life, I suppose. Pathways. Yeah. That's actually, again, not to lump on too many analogies on top of analogies, but I think we mentioned it before, this idea of a psychedelic experience the analogy is your brain is, or your mind is like a ski slope, and there's paths driven into that hillside, say, that most people are kind of going down. They've gone down 100 times before you, and you kind of fall into their kind of roots. But the psychedelic experience is like a fresh sprinkling of snow.
Yeah.
You get to make those paths yourselves. Now, the biggest ones and the deepest ones are still there, but you get a chance at least to see new possibilities.
Yeah, an opportunity to change them. But sure, I think that's even what kind of, and now my very limited understanding of like neuroscience and the workings of the brain and stuff, isn't that what they kind of say? Like that, when these things happen in your life, traumatic experiences and stuff like that, that's what they're doing within the brain. It's like carving out that path, and then when something badly scars you, when you experience a similar situation, it'll trigger you. Do you know what I mean? Like, so it'll trigger an explosive reaction, or it'll trigger anger, or it'll trigger fear, or it'll trigger one of them things. So that's as you're saying with the ski slope, it's literally like carving them in. But them are very hard to change, no matter how much meditating and how much healing you do for something. You still always carry it with you, and you can still be triggered. Like, there's plenty of things I've thought, I'm definitely over that, and that doesn't bother me anymore. And then one day I'm in work, and before I know it, I'm up to 90, and you're worked up about a situation, and then you kind of catch yourself and you're like, oh yeah, I thought I'd put that to bed, I thought I was done with that, like, but obviously not, like, so I think that them kind of things are very hard to change. It's not an easy task to do that, like,
No, very much so. You said something there that I want to delve into a little. You noticed you weren't, I can't remember exactly what you said, but you noticed something about yourself, which would lead you to believe, like, who within yourself is doing the noticing.
Yeah.
So I think we've briefly talked about on previous episodes this idea of there being kind of multiple yous, the angry you, the sad you, the loving father you, or whatever else. But I had heard of things like ego, even just take ego for example. Before I had done psychedelics, I'd heard of the idea of an ego, and that was the I, the Fran McKeown, and then your soul or your subconscious was something kind of deeper. That was the limit of my understanding of the unconscious and the ego, say, pre having done psychedelics. But since you introduced them to me, I've taken, on one occasion at least, a sufficient dose to get what's known as ego death. So it wasn't until I had an ego death experience where the kind of the viewer, the I, the Fran McKeown, the persona, that was killed or died. Like, I experienced death, multiple deaths, if I'm being honest, and I disintegrated and dissolved, and all that was left was kind of a sense of oneness with the universe. And I know to anybody who hasn't done psychedelics, that just might sound a bit strange, but what I'm conscious of is people who've listened to our previous conversations. What I'm conscious of is them having followed us up until now, but now might start losing me because I've gone a lot further down that psychedelics journey since having spoken to you last day. So my perception of all these things have completely changed. Have yours, having spent the next 2 years, so sorry, just to bring it back round, you do psychedelics, not regularly, but you alluded to it at the start that every so often you have to bring yourself back and remind yourself of that experience. So
yeah, I suppose I definitely don't think I was saying that I'd have to do that through the psychedelics. I think any of the times now that I'm tending to do psychedelics is usually because it's other people that want to do them. Do you know what I mean? Like, anytime I'm really, like, it would be very rare now that I would do psychedelics for myself, or I would really be going in there for an intention for myself, which I did the last time I talked to them, but that had been the first time in a while. Really any of the psychedelics I'm taking now would be to do with other people who are looking for healing, and to do, because they obviously want to have that experience themselves. So it's never really so much for myself that I'm doing them anymore. Do you know?
And the people that you're helping, presumably you're not on the street saying, who wants help with psychedelics? People are coming to you.
Yeah, go down Trimgate Street. No, of course not. Yeah.
Is there something that unifies the type of person that might present themselves to yourself with an interest? Is there something that connects them all?
Yeah, I suppose they're probably searching for something, aren't they? A lot of the time, it will happen through conversations that will come up by, some people would say chance, other people would say synchronicity, like, but they'd be conversations to where I'd be involved with people, and, like, as I done with even Dave, how the conversation just came out with him. Like, could be working in a house, and I ended up seeing him with the Honor t-shirt on him, and all of a sudden I was like, oh, Dave, like, has the Honor t-shirt, so he's obviously into Aubrey Marcus and Joe Rogan, and that literally sparked mine and his conversations, like, but that would happen at different times, or it would people who would know me as well, like, people who have, heard my story, and, know exactly kind of what I done in Peru and things like that, and they would tend to, say that they're definitely interested in having them experiences and stuff like that. So that would be more or less it. That would tend to come up. Like, it's not something I'm going around broadcasting on the side of the van or anything like that. I've done psychedelic experiences or that, like, it usually would come about in a kind of a natural form of a conversation, like, and usually it would go from there, like, and people are genuinely interested in it because people are suffering. Like, the world definitely seems like it's in chaos at the minute, doesn't it? Like, like, you look around the world and, there's so much suffering going on in the minute. People are, mentally suffering, there's an awful lot going on in the world that has people, even when you take into account, like, the use of technologies and things like that. Like, I think it's further and further stripping us away back from nature. But I think people are genuinely interested to hear about these things and see that maybe there is somewhere. So we've all, especially in the last few years, like there's a massive turn away from religion. But when you turn away from religion, something has to fill that void in people's lives. So what people are now, what I find more and more people are starting to turn towards, is they're hearing these stories of people who are going out and have drank ayahuasca. They're hearing these stories of people who've used, psilocybin mushrooms, whether it be in Mexico, whether it be, in Ireland, no matter where it is. People are hearing these stories and hearing the benefits of them. Or even the science community, like it's such a movement right now, like, like even only, what was it, this week there was the interview in the paper or whatever about the first clinical trials for psilocybin mushrooms being done in Dublin. Like it's happening all over the world, and what they're finding is these modalities, as I spoke on the last two podcasts, which are healing people, they're changing people's perspectives, and it's happening on a massive scale. Like there's so many people who are now interested in this way of life, and maybe it is because the religions have failed so much, but something has to fill the void. If we don't have something to believe in and something to give us hope and understanding, then we naturally turn towards nihilism and things like that. Like you look at even like the way Jordan Peterson speaks about how, back in Soviet Russia and different places like that, how when God was taken out of the equation, people turned to the state. So and when they turned to the state, they were willing to kill and murder for the state. And that's because there's something missing and lacking in their lives. But people need direction. Like I definitely work best in my life when I've got a goal to aim towards and I've got, something to be focused on and things like that. They are definitely what make me the healthiest and the happiest and the best person I am. And I think people are now turning towards these plant medicines because they're hearing so many good reports. They're hearing, incredible stories of people, who are suffering from depression, anxiety, all of them things. It's not like it's just a magic pill, like, but like it nearly is, because people are having these experiences, and it's one or two experiences and it's changing their life completely. They're reconnecting to, what you want to call, whether it's source or divine or whatever it is, like, and it's taken away a lot of the issues that they're having. And the more and more people that hear that, and the more and more people hear that there's no side effects, it's not like the medication that we're being handed out in chemists and all of them kind of things, that there's no side effects to these things. Like I've been suffering in a dark hole there with depression for 6 or 8 months, and the tablets are even longer, and the tablets they've given me, they're somewhat alleviating that, but they're also leading me that I'm very numb to the world around me. But you can go and you can have this psychedelic experience. You can take the mushroom or you can take ayahuasca, and it's reconnecting you to, again, I would say the divine. Some people would say the source. Other people would say it's just your higher, it's your subconscious. But whatever it is that it's connecting you to is healing you. So why not have that in your life? Like, it's only in, how long are we dealing with, medicine as it is now, medicine as in a tablet. And to me, that kind of medicine, I'm not saying it doesn't work for some things. It works for an awful lot of things. And having that medicine is absolutely brilliant, like, do you know what I mean? But sometimes it doesn't heal the illness. It just numbs it and dulls it down so it becomes bearable. So if that's your option, if your option is to numb everything down and for everything to become bearable, or to have these experiences with plants that are grown from the ground, I know which one I take every day. I don't mean I'd be taking the psychedelics every day. I don't mean, if you ask me each time, I'd always go for the plants. It's a natural thing that's grown from the ground, with no side effects, and the benefits that are coming out now to humanity, and science are proving this exact thing. It's not like, it's just some people coming back from the jungle that are talking about this and saying this. Like, the science now has been done in John Hopkins, as you said, you've heard about them happening. It must be a big thing when you're hearing an Irish scientist talking about being able to administer psilocybin mushrooms to people as a cure for depression in a country like Ireland, where, things were so strict and we seemed so backwards up until 10, 20 years ago, didn't we? Like, you know.
Oh yeah, the zeitgeist has certainly changed, absolutely,
sure.
like without a doubt.
Yeah.
And I think people like even the likes of myself the smallest of degrees, and the likes of Joe Rogan on the largest of degrees, and everyone in between all has their kind of part to play in spreading the good word.
Yeah, no, for sure.
It's funny you said though. You mentioned that people are getting great benefit from the experience. Because it's not the drug per se, it's the experience the person gets from the drug. It's not fair to say,
absolutely,
because I think that's something that might be missed on a lot of people who aren't as familiar, who've never had one of these experiences or one of these. What's the best word, do you think? Experience, trip?
Yeah, I suppose. I suppose you would say just an experience. Like, that's what it is. Everything is just experience, isn't it? But I suppose the way I would always kind of phrase them is like, you know, you're talking about the mushroom and saying, you know, some people say, oh, so it's just a drug or it's just this or it's that. Like, but to me, it's a key. So the key to the lock. So it unlocks the divine within you, and that's, you know, that's what I would believe that they do. Like, you know, like they obviously there's different names. From some people would say psychedelics, some people would say plant medicines, other people would say, what's the word I'm thinking of? Entheogens. And what entheogens means is to unlock the God within. And that's what all the tribes, all the different cultures throughout humanity would have described them as. Like, you know, they're God manifesting things, like, you know. And you can, like, it's not the mushroom is literally that. It's literally the key to the experience. So you literally take the mushroom and the experience happens within you. It all happens inside your mind, and that's why these things are done in a, you know, in a ceremonial setting. You know, they're done in the dark, and you literally go inside yourself to find the answers. You don't look to the outside world for the answers when you're using these medicines. It's all going inside yourself. And, you know, when you're in these ceremonies, you know, there is a certain amount of talking, and there is, you know, because there's so much going on that you need to just, you know, touch base with reality, you know, maybe every hour or so, just to make sure that everybody else is getting what you're getting, like, you know, and, or, you know, that everybody else is okay and things like that. But, you know, that's what they are to me. I fully believe they're medicines, and I believe they're medicines that nature have given us, and they're curing an awful lot of the diseases that our society seems to be suffering from right now, like, you know.
No, without a doubt, but they don't seem to be curing the ego as such, as much as they're kind of almost, again, the language kind of fails me here, but soothing the soul. Have you gotten better over the last couple of years? Because you're at this a couple of years ahead of me, say, at just explaining yourself. Like, one thing that I came across recently was this idea that your unconscious doesn't speak English, so it can't be spoken to directly, say, like your ego can. So that's one distinction that I find helpful, is that your subconscious doesn't speak English. So, but what you can communicate with it through are symbols. And that symbol might be a hieroglyph, an actual symbol or an icon, or it could be a mood or a creepy environment. Or, you know, when you walk into an environment, you mightn't necessarily say to yourself, this place is scary, but you're fucking scared. That's your unconscious that's feeling that, as opposed to your ego as such. But the reason I think I'm going to keep coming back to these kind of definitions. So again, the way I'm starting to conceptualize the ego is that if a plane, say, again, by way of analogy, if an aeroplane is my body, the cockpit is my brain, and the ego is the pilot as such. Does that kind of work?
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, yeah, definitely. And like, the idea of the ego, like, it's a funny one, because, you know, in a lot of, you know, new age thinking and all of that, like, they would all talk about, you know, wanting to, you know, get rid of the ego or kill off the ego and all of that. But I would not buy into that at all. Like, you know, the ego is the thing. How I would view the ego is the ego is the thing that's, exactly as you said, is piloting you around this world. Like, you know what I mean? You need your ego to go out and set up your own business, or to go to work, or to go and, you know, have relationships with your wife and your kids, and, you know, all of them things. So the idea that the ego is a bad thing, you know, I certainly, and needs to be gotten rid of, is something I definitely don't buy into. And that's, I think, along the lines a lot of the new age stuff. And, you know, when you're on the medicine, there is what they call an ego dissolution. So the ego kind of breaks away, and you're experiencing your consciousness, maybe of your higher self or whatever. But by the end of that experience, you're definitely glad to see the ego again. Like, I'm glad Ivor McQuillan is there to get up, go home, and get up the next day and have a day with with Elaine and the kids. Like, you know what I mean? You need the ego to navigate the world. So the idea of getting rid of the ego is not something I would buy into in any way. Like, your ego is you. Like, it's how you navigate, and as you said, how you pilot through this world. Like, and you want that, but you want it to be a healthy ego. You want, you need to be humbled and grounded with the ego so that it doesn't run amok, because the ego can either be an incredible friend or it can be an incredible tyrant, and it depends on how much you let it run amok or how much you can kind of keep it in control or whatever, and I think that's what meditation and different things like that kind of teaches. When you're meditating, you're beginning to see these ideas, and what you kind of do is, and you were nearly alluding to it earlier, is you become the watcher of ideas. So the ideas are flowing in your mind when you're meditating, and on your normal day to day, you could be in work and the ideas are going, and you're constantly latching onto them ideas and acting on them ideas. But when you begin to meditate and you begin to watch the ideas and realize, oh, them ideas aren't me, so where are they coming from? So you can kind of you begin to kind of separate them. So when anger arises, or when false pride or any of that arises in you, you can catch that quickly and kind of and I think that's kind of the benefits from meditation and all that. Like, and that's how you kind of keep your egos in check in a way. Do you know what I mean? And that's when it can be your friend rather than your tyrant. It's your tyrant when you're constantly following every idea that comes up in your mind and acting as if that's you and solely you. But the big question meditation leaves you with is where are them ideas coming from? Is it the subconscious? Is it coming from outside of your consciousness? That's the big thing. But the beauty with, I find, with meditation is that that's what it does. It kind of allows you to see that not every impulse has to be acted on, like,
Yeah, and that you're not the author of your thoughts necessarily.
Exactly.
I think what you're speaking about can be kind of encapsulated in the word mindfulness. Would that? You'd agree with that?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah,
the idea
it is being aware. It's awareness.
Awareness. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the idea of meditation, from my perspective at least, is to sit comfortably, preferably in a quiet room, concentrate on something, typically the breath, close your eyes and just breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. And the goal, or what you're trying to do, is to empty your mind, clear your mind of thoughts. And when you do that, it's not that when you do that, it's as you try to do that, you realize that all these thoughts keep popping into your head.
Yeah.
And that can show you explicitly that they're not yours.
Yeah.
Do you know the kind of way it's a weird one to kind of quieten your mind and for your mind to be populated with all these different ideas.
Well, you're watching the ideas rather than thinking you're thinking them. Do you know what I mean?
Like, so you see them arise.
You're watching the ideas, and before, when you're unaware of them kind of things, you think you're the one that's constantly having them ideas. But as you begin to meditate and you see them thoughts constantly arise, because they're a constant flow. Like, I don't think, like, I've not experienced it in the few years I'm meditating where them thoughts shut off for too long. Like, you can shut them down for a couple of seconds, and then all of a sudden they're back there again and again. It seems to be a constant flow of consciousness through your mind. But you become aware that you're not the one thinking them, that you're just the one who's viewing and acting on them, And I think that can change your life for the benefit, because, and that's not to say that it'll stop you from getting angry, because you're still going to get angry. It's just that you'd hopefully catch that quicker than if you are unaware of the fact that it's just a feeling that you're having,
Yeah, you can think of somebody comes to mind that makes you angry, that bitch ex-girlfriend or whoever or whatever it is, that comes to mind. And instead of identifying it as a thought that's after populating itself in your consciousness, you go, fucking bitch. You're in that mentality then for as long as those kind of negative thoughts keep coming up. And I think there's something, there's a positive feedback loop there. The more negative thoughts you are having, the more negative thoughts you're likely to have. And then we start ruminating and going round and round in circles. I actually caught myself, was it during COVID or not long before COVID? I was at home, I was stressed out over half a dozen different things. I wasn't long in the door from work. The phone was buzzing and she was probably after annoying me, or with something. I was having a bad day, and my little 6-year-old Fionn goes, daddy, you know, will you look at something or whatever? And I was like, oh, not now, buddy. And I said that bit out loud, but I kept the rest in my head. And the thing that I kept in my head was, can you not see Daddy's tearing himself apart? Because I was doing something. I was all up in my own head. There was all this going on, and then Fionn interrupted me.
Yeah.
And I was like, Jesus Christ, man, can you not see I'm busy fucking destroying my own mind here with negative thinking?
You said it perfectly, up in your own head.
Yeah,
and
no, that's very much so.
That's when you're not in awareness, you're up in your own head, you're in that thought, and you think that everything you're thinking is you know.
But you see, before I had taken the psychedelics, before having met yourself and introduced them to me, I would have done a certain amount of meditation. I would have considered myself relatively mindful. I would have caught myself on several occasions getting angry, especially in the car, and then kind of gone, fucking hell, Fran, you're roaring and shouting to no one in the car. You know,
I think we've all
relax.
Done that.
But it's great to catch yourself doing that on the way home instead of pulling in your driveway and welcoming your kids with that blood flow and that everything going on in your own head. Like,
it's you know, they asked the Buddha, you know, what was the main things you gained from meditation? He said nothing. Didn't gain anything from meditation. What I lost was anger, anxiety, fear of death.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
you
don't
too much.
gain anything.
It's not that you don't have enough. You've too much.
Yeah.
You need to let go of some shit.
It's not with meditation. It's not something that you're trying to aim towards. Oh, if I get to here, I'll be there, or if I get to here, you know, I can get me red stripe on me belt. Like, do you know what I mean? It's more you're trying to, you know, lose that anger and become much more aware of yourself, you know, and catch them things before they develop into what can become real issues. As you said, the last thing you want to be doing is, you know, screaming and shouting at your kids, you know.
Yeah, which so many of us do.
Yeah,
you know?
Sure, of course. But sure, that's human nature, isn't it? Like, you know, it is unfortunate that, especially, you know, especially as you know yourself, a businessman, there's pressures that come with that. There's pressures that comes with being a father, the same as there are exact pressures that there is with being a mother, and we all live very stressful lives, and sometimes it is easy to go out, you know, to go home and, you know, let that anger engulf you and maybe snap at the kids or snap at herself or whatever, and neither of yous mean it, obviously, like, you know what I mean? Like, but when you're in that red mist, it's very hard to catch yourself out of it, isn't it? Like, so.
Oh, very much so. Yeah, very much.
That's what meditation has probably helped me with, and I think, you know, in the last psychedelic experience I had, it kept stressing to me how important the breath is. How important, you know, to return to your breath is. Like, when you're in a stressful state, and when you're maybe flipping out angry about something, to just go to your breath, because your breath, you know, how the Eastern philosophies would describe it anchors you into the present moment. And in the present moment, that's where you'll clear your head. Like, it's only when you're unaware of what's going on and your surroundings around you that you lose that plot. But if you can keep bringing it back to your breath when you hit them moments, it'll pass over a lot quicker than if you don't, you know. And that's definitely what the last experience on the psychedelics was showing me. Like, you know, in them situations, constantly go back to your breath, like, just, you know, deep breaths. And you look at the work the likes of kind of Wim Hof and people like that are doing now. We're only scratching the surface on how important our breath is. Like, you know, the teachings that he's doing, and, you know, even that as a cure for depression and anxiety. It seems like at the minute there seems to be a real return to wisdom that we may have lost in the past.
Back to basics.
So back to the natural things, like, and more people seem to be, even like with CBD oils and different kind of things like that, like, people are more and more inclined now to look towards, you know, a cure from nature. And it's my belief that nature gives us the cure for everything. Nature has given us the poison and the cure for everything, you know. Like, I always kind of laughed, beside every nettle you'll always find a dock leaf, like, you know.
Yeah.
So the poison is there, and so is the cure. And I think nature has given us these medicines, and to me it's no coincidence that at a time when we are in chaos, the world is in chaos at the minute, and it's no coincidence for me that these plant medicines are now starting to spread across the world at a time when we need them the most, and people are using them the most.
Do you think, it's funny because I was listening to old school George Carlin there recently, and it was from 50 or 60 years ago, and he was going on about how everyone was protesting. These guys are protesting this, these guys are protesting that, these guys are protesting your right to protest, and it all felt very 2020. And I wonder how much of the world being in chaos that we think it is now is always in chaos.
Yeah, I know there definitely is elements of that, but, you know, when I say in chaos, like, I don't say chaos as it's a bad thing, because you know, as I've spoken to you before about, like, I would feel that everything is in complete balance. Like, chaos and order have to live together, and out of the chaos rises order, you know. So the idea, like, it definitely seems that, you even look at, you know, the things that are happening in America now with the race riots and all of that kind of stuff that's going on. You know, Carl Jung spoke about that eventually, collectively as a species, we have to experience a dark night of the soul together. And that what that dark night of the soul will show up will be our racism, our sexism. You know, we're seeing a lot of that kind of play out in society at the minute, aren't we? Like, a complete divide within society, and that's not just in America. You look at any, you know, anything that's online at the minute. Now, I'm not on any of them, so Elaine will be telling me this, or I'd be seeing where I might see it would be on, say, maybe the journal. So I'd look into the journal and I look up a story on the journal, and then you go down to the comment section, and it's literally like,
bin fire.
It's just everybody's at each other's throats or whatever. And that's not to say that that's what's going on everywhere around the world. I don't mean the whole world is in chaos. I just mean we seem to be going through a chaotic time. Like, we're looking at, you know, weather patterns that are changing. We've got this pandemic that we're all dealing with. Like, it's a bit of a shitstorm at the minute, like, you know, and that's what it seems like. But to me, that's a good thing, because I would be of the belief that out of chaos rises order. And likewise, maybe we've been through a time, you know, if you look back through our history, while there has been, you know, as you're speaking about, there has been different events and different things that have happened that are bad, but we've lived in a relatively, you know, safe time over the last, 1,000 years or so anyway. And maybe now we're about to see a bit of chaos coming into the world, where, as I said, the pandemics, the change in weather and all of that. But to me, it's all just a learning process. Like, you know, it's all about helping us to view ourselves and view the world around us. Like, you know, like, you have to look at the situation even over in America and stuff like that, and you need to look at, you know, what's happening with them race riots and all of them kind of things, and you need to look at yourself. You need to hold the world up as a mirror to yourself, and the things that, you know, and far be it from me to tell people what they need to do. When I'm talking like that, I'm talking about myself. That's what I try to do. I try to hold the world up as a mirror, and if I see racism, I look at, okay, there's issues within myself that maybe there's racism or there's sexism or there's different things, and only by becoming, again, that word, aware of them things, can you heal them and change them. And only as a society, by becoming aware of them issues that are happening over there, can we heal them, can we talk about them. The worst thing that seems to be happening is, and it seems to be happening very much from the left, is that they want to silence all that. But we can only change and make it a better world if we talk through these situations. You know, that's what I think. I definitely think what's happening now in the world right now is it's putting up a mirror for us to see all our nastiness and all, you know, the things that we're not happy in ourselves about. And it's up to you to try and use that as a tool to change yourself, and to change yourself to be a better person, like, you know.
No, without a doubt. And I think that idea that I've heard this saying before. Maybe I don't know it well enough to understand it. But this idea that when somebody annoys us, what is annoying us about their actions is how it reflects on our own behavior. I've heard that before, but to me, I think maybe I'm missing something. But to me, it's more accurately put that when you see something that, let's say, bugs you or annoys you or repulses you or whatever it is, it can be something that you have inside you. It might necessarily be like, if you're turned off, if you're turned off by racism, say, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're racist, say, but you view racist actions as disgusting, so it invokes a disgust response. Like, do you know that kind of way?
Yeah. Well, what you're talking about is, I think it's where Carl Jung again spoke about that shadow side. So we all have a shadow side in us, and when you are seeing something in somebody that you don't like, let's say, for instance, somebody's a gossiper, and you're looking at that person and you're going, Jesus, that fella's an awful gossiper, isn't he? But what you're really doing is you're projecting outwardly of yourself that idea that, you know, the fact that you gossip about people, and everybody does it, you know what I mean? But you're projecting out onto that person, rather than saying, right, they're the issues with myself. You can see that in other people, and that's, you know, why they speak about the world being a mirror to you. Everything is a mirror of yourself. What you're seeing in other people that you don't like is a mirror image of the things you don't like about yourself but are unable to admit to yourself. because you're not aware of the situations. We bury them things deep and down, and no, I don't gossip, or I'm not racist, or I'm not sexist, or all them things. But maybe on closer inspection of your life, which is what Carl Jung's theories and kind of way of understanding psychology is exactly that. You need to look at them issues and see if they are things that are affecting you or things that are driving you, like
No, absolutely, without a doubt. And Jung, before I forget, wasn't it him that said that just getting back to what we were talking about ideas, was it Jung that said that people don't have ideas, that ideas have people?
Yeah, I think it was, yeah.
And I think a big part of what's wrong with just the human population generally these days is the polarization. So people, whether it's identity politics, people on different sides of the political spectrum, they can only see the trueness in their own ideology, and they become a spokesperson for their ideology as opposed to a free thinking, an independent human being. And I think one of the beauties of the psychedelic experience for me, and in particular with the ego dissolution, was when you experience that, the death of Fran McKeown, you're still there having you're, in inverted commas, you're still there. You die and something remains. What that, I think, has shown me is just the folly in the human condition, the way that we get so wrapped up in our own egos and our own echo chambers that we can't see the wood from the trees. That we see somebody else with a different opinion than ours, and we literally cannot understand how that person could think like that without being inherently evil or inherently bad or in need of repression in some way.
Well, I think a lot of it boils down to too is that people seem to be coming a lot to a conversation and not wanting to have a conversation, just wanting to be right. So literally, when you're talking your talk, they're literally sitting there in their head and they're trying the best way to win the argument. And unfortunately, that isn't really the best way to have a conversation. And unfortunately, we're not going to change, I suppose, the ills of the world, are we, if we're not having proper open conversation, where the best way, I think, to come to a conversation, and now I'm 100% guilty of not always doing this, is to come there with the basis that you know nothing. But there's too many people coming to conversations thinking they know everything.
Yes.
And they've got the answer to everything, and I think that's a massive issue that you're seeing played out on social media and all of them kind of different things at the minute, because it's all very polarizing. But if people can more come to the conversation to learn something rather than to teach something, I think we'll have far better conversations, and I don't think we'll get bogged down in that I'm right or you're right, or do you know what I mean? I love how Joe Rogan talks about he's not married to his ideas. So he's in no way, he's more than willing to change his point of view on, when better information comes along, or when, thing. And I think that's the way we should all look at kind of conversations and look at life. Like, treat life like you know nothing. And you learn an awful lot more than if you've convinced yourself you know everything already. You won't learn anything new if you've closed yourself off, and you become just as dogmatic as the religions that we all give out about, or the science that we give out, that some people give out about and say is dogmatic. Is if you cling on to your ideas with no want to change them, or get fresh understanding with them, they just become, as you said, an ideology, don't they? And you've married yourself to an ideology that you're not willing to ever give up on. You're going to fight to the death.
Well, you identify with it, so you are
exactly,
the ideology.
Exactly,
so you can't, giving up on your ideology is like giving up on yourself.
Yeah. But you see, that's the beauty of what the psychedelic keeps showing you. There's a constant theme that runs through psychedelics of death and rebirth. And what you begin to kind of see to yourself is that, I'm actually reborn every day. I die and I'm reborn every day, and so should my ideas die and be reborn every day. The things that I thought yesterday might not necessarily be the things that I think today. And that's, I think, the best way to kind of look at life, because you need to be able to change and adapt when better information comes along,
No, without a doubt. And it's brilliant having had the recordings that I've had with people, especially with yourself, say, because I listened to our first two initial conversations back before you came on today, just to kind of remind myself where we kind of left off to a certain degree. But one thing that I noticed myself doing was I was probing, because you mentioned a lot of things like, you know, God and spirit and soul. And if we had tried to have that conversation, let's say 10 years previous, you wouldn't have been on for a second episode, because I would have written you off in the fucking woo-woo character. I mightn't have, you know.
Bin.
But it's funny though, because the younger version of me would have been very dogmatic insofar as I was kind of a materialist, absolutist scientist. If you couldn't examine it with a microscope, it didn't exist. I wasn't quite that bad, but I wasn't far off it. And I suppose the psychedelic experience for me kind of blew that notion out of the water a little. And I've always been a big fan of science, and still am. And within science, there's an effort to find what's called the unifying theory, something that will unify Einstein's theory of relativity and quantum physics. Now, that's pretty much the limit of my understanding of it. I wouldn't. I know. I wouldn't try and go any further at that. But basically, there's Einstein has a theory that works absolutely fucking perfectly with things moving really, really fast and on huge scales. And his mathematics just cannot be questioned. But then there's quantum mechanics, which is the opposite, things that are infinitesimally small. And the mathematics there apparently works out absolutely perfectly. Nobody denies it, but the two of them can't coexist. And the analogy I'm going to try and draw is that what I'd love, or I suppose not what I'd love to see happen, what I'm finding myself doing is being in search of a unifying theory of religions. And what I love about what psychedelics do is there's no psychedelic doctrine. Do you know, the kind of way like Christianity has its doctrine, all the monotheisms have their doctrines, and even the pagan religions, and all religions, they've all had, whether it's a 10 commandments or a list of things you can and can't do, there's right and wrong, and we have the answer basically. But all psychedelics do is they don't even show you, they bring you to, I don't know what I might call it, a divine space. They don't bring you to a Catholic space, but I suppose they'll bring a Catholic to a Catholic space, and they could bring a Jew to a Jewish space. Like, I think if my mum was to have a high dose of psychedelics, then again it depends on her setting. I mean, if she had it in a natural history museum, she might have a different one than she'd have if she had it in a church or a cathedral.
You see, the psychedelic experience seems to be very much on symbolism, doesn't it? Do you know what I mean? Like, I've 100% on psychedelics seen, like, Ganesh from Hinduism and different things like that. Like, I've definitely seen some of them icons within the experience, but I know exactly what you're saying. Like, it's not like it's saying, you know, this way or that way is the right way. And maybe what consciousness is, maybe consciousness doesn't look at anything as right or wrong or good or bad. Maybe we're the ones, maybe the ego is the one that looks at right or wrong or good or bad. Maybe when consciousness is at its, you know, within that realm, maybe it's neither good nor bad. Maybe it's just an experience. Maybe it's the egoic mind that kind of turns it into, well, I believe this is good or this is bad. Maybe, you know, consciousness at its fundamental state is just that. It's an act of being with no boundaries, no right or wrong, him or her, up or down. Maybe it's just a constant flow of experience, like, you know. And it's the egoic mind that can put it into boxes and tends to compartmentalize it, like, you know. And maybe that's what the ego is doing. The ego is creating the separation between me and you. That's what's creating the separation, or the belief that there's a separation between me and you. Because you said, you know, when you experienced that ego dissolution, that you became in tune with the oneness of the universe. So maybe the ego's job while you're down here and on this existence is to put that boundary between me and you. But maybe when you leave here, there's no boundaries. Everything dissolves into that one field of consciousness, like, you know. So maybe consciousness at its fundamental state and outside of the material realm, there's no separation. It's literally an infinite flow, like, you know.
And do you think, again, I know you mightn't have a go-to answer for this, but is that what animals have? So animals don't have the ego. Like a fox considers itself to be whatever it is. It's not, you know, Percy Magoo the fox. Do you know that kind of way?
Well, children are the same. You look at a child. Till a child learns language, how does it think? So for the first year of a child's life, it's just constantly experiencing. There's no thought
it's
process.
actions.
It's just experiencing in, you know, complete, you know, wonder of the world. Like, and, you know, that's, I suppose, you know, one of the teachings of Jesus Christ was to find the kingdom of heaven, return to your childlike state. And, you know, maybe what the teaching behind that was to, you know, to get rid of that egoic thinking mind, like, do you know what I mean? To silence the thinking mind and just experience everything in the present moment as it is. And then there's no boundaries. There's no nothing, like, you know.
Yeah, it's interesting because one thing I noticed with my own two kids, a very small sample size to be fair, but if they were kicking off as infants, as babies, they'd be screaming the playtime. But if you brought them outside,
Yeah,
it just seemed they just stopped screaming and they just kind of.
yeah.
But and I wonder, to the baby's mind, is that almost like a psychedelic experience? So they're in the nice warm room, the nursery or your sitting room or wherever it is. They're very familiar with their surroundings. Babies, you don't bring babies much place anywhere. You know, that kind of way they kind of, you stick at home for the first while. Exactly. But to be in an enclosed space that you know is safe with all your familiar smells and sounds and all the rest of it, to get yourself into a heightened state of anger or alertness or whatever a kid kicking off is, and then to be brought outside into the daylight where there's sky and clouds and trees, like it must be just, I don't know, I've often likened that to it almost being like a psychedelic experience, because as you were saying, like newborns especially, like what must it be to experience the world as a newborn, like before the ego has developed. Because that's and like, again, that's going to send me down another rabbit hole. I've never really thought back that far in time in my own life to whereby I hadn't developed an ego yet. And if you haven't developed it yet, I don't know, it's just a fascinating thought. Like, it's just, I don't know.
It is, but like the way I would kind of think about it is that they're just purely experiencing. Do you know what I mean? And maybe, like as we were saying, like, so the fundamental part of consciousness, maybe it is just experience, because the child doesn't learn right from wrong till it learns the words right from wrong. It doesn't look at a bird and say, or it doesn't look at a bird and think bird till it's taught that it's a bird. It's just experiencing what the bird is. But as soon as you've taught it the word bird, it will never experience that bird the same way again.
Yes.
Because it's automatically, the mind is thinking, oh, there's a bird that flies and blah, blah, blah. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, language is massively limiting, but I mean, we have to limit our experience, because if we're constantly, perpetually experiencing everything at the same time.
Absolutely. You don't get, the microgreens don't get grown.
They certainly don't. The podcast doesn't get recorded, whatever else. Fucking sure.
But like, you know, again, to go back to language, like we talk about how we struggle to, you know, come out with the right language to properly describe a psychedelic experience. And there's a lovely kind of teaching within Vedanta Hinduism, and that is that the language is a product of the ego, and the ego can never fully understand the divine. It can only be experienced. So, you know, as I've said to you before, I've had these conversations with loads of people, and I've done my best to explain to them what the psychedelic experience is. But anything I ever tell anyone can never live up to the psychedelic experience. Do you know what I mean? And it's because the language is constructed by the ego. And the ego can never fully experience the divine, because you lose the ego. To fully experience that divine within the psychedelic experience, it's ego dissolution, and you then experience the divine. And meditators, you know, across Buddhism and, you know, the Hindus and Taoists and all that, when they say they meditate, it's literally that, like, you know, that the ego is dropped and you experience reality for what it is, like, you know. So you can't bring that experience back, because as soon as you try to use language to explain it, you've lost its essence, because it only can be, the divine can only be experienced. It's not thought of through the logic, the mind of logic and things like that, you know.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that it's not just the psychedelic experience that can't be explained through English, say, or vocabulary, or language. But like, I've scored goals in soccer. I've scored tries in rugby. I've won fights. I've lost fights.
Yeah.
You know, there's a whole pile of different things and experiences that I've had that I could try and explain to you. I could try and tell you what it feels like to, you know, score the winning goal and, you know, the final or whatever it is. Like, you know, there's a million and one different examples of it, or whether it's...
Well, maybe it's all experience then. maybe
how do you mean?
Like maybe all experience can't be properly, described. It has to be experienced. It has to be a lived experience. And I would believe maybe that's why we're here. We're here to evolve and to grow. As you said, if we had had that first podcast 10 years ago, you probably would have stuck it in the bin, like. But it's only through the evolution of your consciousness that you're now at a stage where you're willing to open up to these kind of things. But you've only opened up to them through the experience of the psychedelic experience, or through the experience of, different conversations and podcasts you've listened to. Like, it's experience that evolves consciousness, I think. Do you know what I mean? It's by living the life down here that your consciousness evolves. And you can only do that by having these experiences down in the material realm.
Yeah, so
that's how I'd feel about it.
Would you, just to see if we're on the same page or even the same book, fuck, I've interrupted myself there and lost my own train of thought. Yeah, so is it fair to say then that by reading books you're evolving or advancing your ego, but by going out in the world and having experiences, you're evolving your unconscious or your soul? Or like, would you equate the unconscious and the subconscious and soul and spirit? Are they all one and the same thing to you? Or
yeah, I don't know, to be honest with you. Like I genuinely, I don't know, and it's not something I would overly think about too much. Like, I don't know whether the subconscious and the soul are the same thing. And I'm not even fully convinced I know myself what the soul is. Like, sometimes I toss that idea around, and, sometimes I would come up with the idea of a soul where you come here, you learn, you grow, and you evolve, and you move on to the next stage. And then there's times where I think, that the soul is literally, you come here and maybe as you die, you just merge back into that stream of consciousness, and you don't go on further. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I would flip-flop between them two ideas at times, like, of whether they're, how important the soul is or what the soul is. Like, and I suppose, I would more believe the idea that your soul is kind of an internal soul that comes here and is reincarnated a number of times to learn and to grow and to move forward, like, and to evolve your consciousness. But like when you talk about subconscious and things like that, I'm not fully sure I fully understand what the subconscious is. Like, do you know what I mean? It seems like it's a, I suppose, an operating program that's running in the background of the computer, like, do you know what I mean, or the background of the ego, like, but to really understand it, I definitely wouldn't know enough about to compare that to say, is that what the soul is? I'm not too sure that that's what the soul is. To me, intuitively, I wouldn't think they're the same thing, but I genuinely don't know, like,
Yeah, but again, we're limited by the language because you're trying to describe experiences using words.
Yeah.
I've heard it said that people who are fluent in, people are fluent in two languages have two souls. There's something to that, like, if you I don't know, let's say you're fucking, like, my little baby brother's Mrs. Julie, she's American, but she's from Peru originally, so she speaks Peruvian,
right? Yeah.
Or Spanish. Is it Spanish? I think it might be Spanish they speak.
Where
she's from, so.
Right.
But I can see how she has a Spanish side to her.
Right.
Do you know, kind of way?
Yeah.
I've seen her speak on the phone to her mum in Spanish.
Right.
And it's weird because she fucking shape shifts into this thing I'm not. I don't really know her. Do you know, kind of way she's very different. So I like that idea that having multiple languages gives you kind of multiple souls, which is an interesting one, because I believe people with split personality disorders have, like, while they're being different people, they have, whilst all the time remaining themselves, obviously, but because of some sort of a split in their psyche and of multiple personalities, each individual personality might have a different eye prescription.
It's mad. Yeah, I've definitely heard things like that. It's mad, isn't it? Like, even, to the point where some will wear glasses, some won't wear glasses. And
yes.
Some will have moles. Some will have moles and others won't have moles. Like, things to actually their body. Now,
jeez, they actually
very now that could be something I was listening to when I was high or something.
That was an Onion article, wasn't it?
There was definitely, I can't remember what it was, but definitely along the lines of people who wear glasses, people who have stutters and then don't have stutters. Definitely kind of things like that. Maybe the old one might be wrong, but definitely the other side of it, where stutters and people who wear glasses, or different things like that. So yeah, you'd have to wonder what that is, wouldn't you? Like, how would you need glasses? Yeah, I think what that would always lead me to is the actual power of the mind.
Well, that's the only reason I brought it up. It's
yeah,
just
for
a
sure.
show, like.
Yeah, the power of the mind, for sure. And like, what a lot of the shamans and things like that would say is, all there is mind. The only thing that exists is mind. Like, the illnesses and the sicknesses and stuff like that we're dealing with in life, be it kind of depressions and anxieties and all of that, they're all just sicknesses of the mind that are manifesting themselves through cancers and through different things like that. Like, and that's how the shamans would talk about it, is it's all about healing your mind, like, and I can give you a very good example of that. Like, one of my friends over in Australia, Gary Morelton, he's been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. So he was diagnosed with the cancer or whatever in, I'm nearly sure it was around March time, February, March time.
Sorry to cut across you, but just to get across the seriousness, my understanding of the stages of cancer, is there a stage 5 of any cancer? Or
I don't think so. I think you have stage 4, and then you're more or less told
you're pretty much terminal at stage 4.
You've got stage 4, and then I think it's terminal or whatever.
Okay.
But like, he's worked with different. So when he got kind of told about that, the doctors more or less keep saying to him, look, this isn't going to end well, more or less, like, and he has been put on a program with this kind of new tablet, and the new tablet was supposed to prolong his life. It wasn't supposed to heal the cancer. It's more of a kind of gives you an extra maybe 2 or 3 years on top of what they say might be kind of 2 years or whatever. Do you know what I mean? But he's worked with a guy who's who has more or less kind of you couldn't heal yourself if it's 3 times, but he's kept his cancer at bay through different forms of meditation, through different kind of things like that. But it's all about getting your mind into that right place, like, and like, I've heard, Stanislav Grof is a guy who he's done, like, he literally has thousands of tests where it was very similar things, where it's all about getting your mind into that right frame of mind. And that can be as healing as anything else, any medication you're taking, or any other thing that you're trying to do, like, But since Morel has got this thing in, as I said, I think it was around March, we're now in August, he has started working with this cancer coach, and as I said, it's all about getting your positive mind, getting all that mind frame going and stuff. And his cancer has gone out of the bones, completely out of the lungs, and if the x-rays at the first, say if for instance the cancer was a golf ball size, it's now down to a pea size, and I think he's going to be in remission by November.
Holy fuck.
And he is there's 4 other people that were diagnosed with the same thing as he was, all put in the same clinical trials, but have not worked with this guy that Morel is working with now. Morel has gone and done everything, so he's no meat, no dairy, like, he's he's gone full vegan and full carnivore. Full everything, like, and them people, I think 2 of them have more or less been told that they need to go for chemo, and the 3rd one has been told that there's no chance of survival or whatever. So the difference between him and Dan, and I'm sure it's not the only difference, it's not just to say that this is the only difference, but he's been working with this guy who's been helping him work with his mind, really, like, but it certainly, would help you to believe in what the shams are saying, that if you can heal your mind, you can heal any disease that's in your body, like,
No, without a doubt. I'm a huge fan of a guy called Gabor Mate. I'm sure you're familiar with him, and his whole shtick is that, pretty much with the rare exception of a few kind of genetic disorders, that all ill health, including pretty much all diseases, is a direct response to your mentality, basically, essentially. He'll go one step further and say it's down to trauma that was experienced as a child that hasn't been dealt with, and it's repressed trauma. Essentially, we're all living with PTSD, and because of that, we're making ourselves sicker and sicker and sicker, basically. And I suppose the beauty of what psychedelics can do is, I don't know, do they give you, or at least they can, given the right amount and the right set and setting, they can give you just a reset, just a complete overhaul of everything. They kind of shake your foundational presuppositions in a way. Like I would have thought at one stage that there was the scientific world, and there was mysticism that tried to do what it could to explain what the scientific world couldn't, basically, and that was basically it. But having had the psychedelic experience, or the spiritual experience, due to psychedelics, whatever way you want to frame it, I had to re-examine everything, because that whole that idea, that illusion that I was under, that there is the materialistic world and there isn't a whole pile else, like that was just completely shattered.
Yeah.
Absolutely, totally and utterly shattered. And the amazing thing to me is that it reliably shatters people's, preconceived notions or perceptions, and forces you to either A, go, oh, that was just, something I don't really want to examine, or B, it starts you off on a path of perpetual re-examination of yourself.
Yeah. No, for sure. So I remember the time, or when you done the higher dose, and I remember you ringing me straight after, and the first line out your mouth was, "I need to reread everything." And I remember I wet myself on the chair. But it is exactly that. It takes a hammer to all them ideas, and it literally shatters them. And I would always, when you hear kind of, like for me, what science should be is an exploration of the outer world. And what religion should be is an exploration of the inner world. And they should both be married together. And I think that's what you were talking about earlier on, where you were saying you'd like to see a
unifying theory of religions. Yeah.
But I think it should be a unified theory of both. I think science and spirituality should go hand in hand. And as I said, one should be, looking to see what the outside world has to offer us, and the other should be looking for the inside world.
There's a term, I can't remember the guy who coined it, but this idea of non-overlapping magisteria, the idea that religion and everything that's underneath that is on one side, and then science is on the other side, that they're two separate realms. They don't overlap at all. Do you now, that's not to say that one is good and one is bad, or you can do without, you can do it one, you can't do it without the other. I'm a firm believer that you certainly need both. I'm just curious as to how much overlap do you think that there
it shouldn't be like, I don't think it should be a case of, a complete overlap, like, but there definitely should be, like, when you listen to people like Rupert Sheldrake and people like that who are, have a foot in both worlds, even Gabor Mate. Like, Gabor Mate is one of the leading child psychologist experts in the world, but he also is a massive proponent for ayahuasca.
Oh, 100%, yeah, absolutely. Like, and psychedelics. And you don't know that because you overheard a story down a back alley. Like, that's front and centre of his
and
his
even
thing.
Jordan Peterson, like Jordan Peterson, and even Sam Harris to an extent as well. Like, they both talk science, but they also understand, well, maybe not so with Sam Harris, but with Jordan Peterson, that there's certainly these, other realms of consciousness, or whatever the word is you want to use for it. So I think, they should definitely overlap, and it should be minimal, like, do you know what I mean? It shouldn't be that they're both in on top of each other, but they should definitely work as a field together. They shouldn't be polar opposites fighting against each other. They should be trying to work towards a common goal in a way. Do you know what I mean? To as you said, to get a unified theory of everything. And you can't like, when I find people like the likes of, maybe say, Richard Dawkins and people like that, and they're saying that there's no place for the psychedelic experience, it's just a product of the mind and the chemicals of the mind or whatever. The thing that I'm just screaming out is that you're trying to base reality on half a picture. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you're just saying to me that all there is the material realm and nothing else exists outside of that, if you haven't had that psychedelic experience, or if you haven't done it through meditation, if you haven't had that outer body or outer consciousness experience, you're viewing reality with half a picture. And you're trying to say, this is what reality is, and there's nothing else. But hold on a minute, there's a whole other picture over here that you're not adding into that equation. Like, so I don't really feel that you can really understand reality till you've had a transcendent experience or a mystical experience. Because when you have this experience, it's such, as you say, it just cracks open your head nearly, more or less, isn't it? Like, it's just like, right, everything I read and heard, I now need to look at with fresh eyes and with a different understanding. And it gives you that chance. It gives you the chance to do that. Like, and I think, again, that's where the healing is happening within it. Like, like, it's, the healing happens when you see something other than this realm, like this material realm that not all scientists, obviously, because we can name the likes of Rupert Sheldrake and Gabor Mate and people like that, like, but the majority of science seems to push that material narrative, doesn't it? That materialistic narrative, doesn't it? Like that.
Well, you see, you can write
machines.
You can write papers on it though, and you can divide it, and you can multiply it and subtract it. It has its utility, but I'm on the same page as yourself insofar that I personally like to have a foot in both worlds, and I like listening to people who have a foot in both worlds.
But maybe again, you know, as we were saying earlier, maybe instead of the scientists and the fucking religious zealot coming to these conversations with their dogmas and their biases, you need to be willing to listen to that other side. They've already made they're convinced that they're right, and that's why we're not getting anywhere with the conversation. It just becomes a clash of two egos who are trying to, you know, who's trying to prove the other wrong, and that's not conversation. That's not what we need. We need deep conversation with open-minded people, like.
Oh, without a doubt, absolutely. And I don't think my having taken psychedelics and had the experiences that I've had and will continue to have, I don't think that discredits me in any way, shape or form. I mean, nothing that I say or even that you say have said generally, or certainly in this podcast, is anti-science or...
Definitely not, yeah.
It might be unscientific, but that's not... Just because something is unscientific doesn't mean that it's false or illogical or not rational. I mean, people have been using these substances across all cultures, across as far back as we can look.
Well, for longer than we haven't. We've been using these plant medicines for longer than we haven't.
Oh, well, when you say haven't, as in like recently?
Happened, like as in up until recently, you know, when you look across even the, you know, the hunter-gatherer tribes, when you look back to even the Mayans, all of them, the Incas, different things, they've all had their sacraments. It's only within, since what, the you know, the 50s and 60s where there's been a real pushback against these medicines. And they've been, you know, well, and you can go even further back with that, like since, you know, the Inquisitions and different things like that, like they burnt all these people at the stake and said they were witches. So I guess what I'm trying to say is it's only up until them times that these plant medicines have been driven underground, because, you know, we had our pagans, we had our druids, we've had all of them. Up until that time, they were all using these plant medicines to have, you know, outer body experiences, to have transcendent or mystical experiences. So what I'm saying is we're less time not using them, and there's a renaissance again happening, which is good, and it'll be interesting to see where it takes the world, you know.
Oh no, very much so. And I think the renaissance in psychedelics is part of a broader renaissance of, like what you mentioned there earlier on, kind of getting back to basics. Like this idea of trying to spend, as something that I've taken on board pretty seriously in the last month or two, is spending as much time in my bare feet as I can.
Yeah.
And it's funny, so I've been working, I have about a 40-hour work week down here since the restaurant's opened back up, and for 95% of that I'm just walking around in my socks. But it's made me aware to the fact that it's great to be walking in essentially your bare feet. You're not stomping around on your heels like you do when you've got shoes or runners on. So you stop doing that, so you tend to walk on your toes a little bit more, but it improves your entire posture, basically. Right. And it makes you more aware of the fact that you spend probably 99% of your life on completely flat surfaces. Right. And that's not good for your health, generally, your mind or your body.
But there's the idea also that you're again connecting to the earth, aren't you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, 100%.
Like
yeah.
Right now, you know, we both have runners on, like, but that rubber between our soul and the ground, you know, is a barrier between us and the earth and nature.
Yeah, it's dehumanizing. I think.
Yeah.
I think there's like, again, these days people frame it poorly. I think people say that you have to spend time in nature because you'll get a load of benefits from it. That's generally what's sold to people. Get out in nature and you'll be the better for it. But I think that's kind of wrong-headed, because I personally think that being away from nature dehumanizes you.
Yeah.
So you should be, as a default, you should be by default part of nature. I remember seeing
we are part of nature, isn't that the thing though?
Without a doubt, but we seem to have lost that idea. We seem to have 100%. Elevated ourselves above nature. We tend to look down on animals.
We're trying to control plants. Nature, isn't it? Like,
very much so, yeah.
You know, and I wonder,
says the man running a vertical farm.
Oh yeah. But like, you know, I wonder, are we suffering a hangover from you know, the survival of the fittest kind of theory, like, you know, from what's his name? Oh, you know him, the scientist.
Survival of
Darwin's theory of evolution and stuff like that. Like you know, that whole thing of, you know, it's the survival of the fittest. Like, but
that wasn't his shtick per se.
Wasn't that right?
No, that was kind of co-opted. That was, people kind of ran with that idea. I don't think he ever said survival of the fittest.
Right.
It was basically those best willing to adapt will be those that survived.
Yeah.
But
we
there's
seem
an
to
element.
we seem to be running on the theme of a survival of the fittest, like, you know.
Oh, absolutely,
and we've treated nature like that too, like, where we think we can control it and we can use it as if. And I wonder, is that coming from materialistic science again, that everything is just dead matter and it's there for our benefit, and if it's not our benefit, let's chop it down and set fire to it, like, kind of thing, you know. And are we, you know, has that way of thinking, because it's you know, it's in our economics, it's in, you know, a large part of the way we're all living our life, like, you know. And I wonder, is that where there's so much suffering coming from in the world as well? You know, I wonder if we had more of a, you know, the way maybe like the pagans looked at the world, or the way the Druids looked at the world, that this idea of a mother Gaia, that the planet is a conscious entity of its own, and it's there as our mother, and it's there as our, you know, to provide these things for us, but not for us to control, you know.
No, without doubt, and you're touching on the premise of the whole off the lead thing, like, you know, this idea that we've become domesticated, we've become fed by the food producers, as opposed to, you know, I'm not expecting everybody to start growing all their own food, but if you're eating out of plastic bags your entire life, you don't have to start growing all your own food in your back garden. Like, there's a midpoint between, you know, living a life of solitude and eating roots and berries that you find that have fallen on the ground. There's a midpoint between that and everything that you eat having been wrapped in plastic or being extruded through a pipe. Do you know that kind of way? So less of one and more of the other is all I'm looking for. But it's a weird one though, because we've grown up as part of nature, say. So I'm into me bird watching or me buzzard watching, more to the point, because I have a couple of buzzards that live around the house and I have a telescope and I keep an eye on them, and it's just one of my little things, like, and I love it. And I think it's great to live in the countryside where we've so much nature. I've got rabbits in the field and I've got the buzzards that to be hunting the rabbits, and it's class. And I think it's brilliant, and I think I'm part of nature. But if I was alive 50 years ago, it would have been the buzzard and the goshawk and the harrier hen or whatever the fuck other things were around,
right?
And I would have thought that was brilliant. But my kid's going to grow up now thinking having rabbits in the field are class, and then his kid's going to grow up thinking that it's class that he saw a rabbit once. Do you know that kind of way? And with every generation, you're connected. Your baseline connectedness to nature drops a peg or two. It diminishes.
But I guess, you know, and that's where I feel like I'm always listening to people saying, "Oh, you need the government to tell you this, or you need somebody to do this to direct you in your life." I find, and what I found best for me is you need to take that responsibility yourself. Like, exactly as you said, you need to teach your kids a different way. And, you know, the other big thing I always hear people say is, "Oh, the school aren't teaching them this, or they're not teaching them that, or whatever." Why aren't you teaching it to them? Like, do you know what I mean? The school is there to teach them an education, but you should be the one who's giving them the life skills that they need, you know, by hopefully bringing them back out into nature, or sourcing their own foods or different things like that. Like, you know, that should be. And the beauty about that is, if you're not that way inclined, by you, you know, learning, by you doing that with your kids, you're learning as much as they're learning, and you're learning how to provide for yourself and look after yourselves. Like, we're definitely, you know, as you've said with the name of the podcast and that, like, we're definitely, you know, in real danger of becoming a real mothered species, aren't we? Like, you know, that we need the government to tell us how fast to drive our cars. We need the government to tell us how much drink we can drink. We need the government to tell us. And I'm not saying there shouldn't be rules. That's not what I'm kind of alluding to. Like, but we definitely need to start taking more personal responsibility for ourselves, and not always be looking to other people to, you know, to make up the rules for us. Do you know what I mean?
No, absolutely, you know, 100%. And I think, again, bringing it back to the psychedelic experience, I think it sets you up to view just, I suppose, the craziness, because when you grow up in something, it becomes normal.
Yeah.
Do you know, that kind of way? If you're raised on 8 hours of TV a day, then hopefully you'll bring up your kids not to watch as much, so they'll only watch 7 hours, and you'll think that that's in some way a fucking improvement. Like, exactly, like, so that kind of way. But psychedelics, for some reason, unknown or otherwise, I don't know, they just they tend to give you just a different perspective. They seem to bring our mindset back, bring it back to a point whereby watching 8 hours of telly is fucking mental.
Not good for you. Yeah.
Do you know? And again, no matter what you're watching, like, or whether it's your phone that you're addicted to, or your tablet, or your music, or your coffee, or whatever it is, and life is set up these days to be so convenient. And getting back to another thing you said earlier, this idea that so this idea of survival of the fittest, we seem to live in a society whereby if you make it in the current paradigm or the current zeitgeist of the status quo, whatever, if you make it, fair play to you, you took advantage of all the things that were on offer to you. But if you don't make it and you're crushed by fucking poverty or socioeconomic background or whatever it is, then, tough luck, basically. Like, tough luck is right.
But I love the idea of, you are your own savior. Do you know what I mean? You're your own savior. I do also get, like, that a lot of that comes from, you're a product for your environment and all of that kind of stuff. Like, but there is ways out of that, like, and it doesn't have to be massive, changes that you make to your life, like, but they just need to be the important changes, and you need to, start to look after yourself first, like, do you know what I mean? And then it is hopefully something that you can teach on to your kids and different things like that, a different way to live, and to get back out into nature and to maybe start growing your own things. Like, they're very easy things to learn, and it's only by each one of us taking responsibility for ourselves that you will kind of change that thing in the world. Like, it's like, I love one of the sayings from Gandhi, like, you be the change you want to see in the world. There's no point in sitting there giving out about things if you're not willing to do the things to change it, and change them first within yourself. And it's only by changing them within yourself first. And I think that's what the psychedelic does as well. It shows you that as soon as you heal yourself, you can begin to help others. Too many people are scarred and are in a bad place themselves. And again, maybe as Carl Jung says, they're projecting out, they're trying to heal the world and they're trying to save the world. But I'm not so sure you can do that from a place where you're, for want of a better word, broken yourself. I think you have to heal yourself first. You have to take that responsibility. And, there's some of the great things Jordan Peterson has, definitely been teaching the world, isn't it? Like the whole, clean your room. That's where it starts.
Get your shit together.
Get your shit together. And by getting your shit together, it's this, as you've all, I love how you've talked over various podcasts about the incremental steps. Start with cleaning your room. Clean your room first, then clean your house, and then go out and see what you can improve in the world. Like,
Oh, without a doubt. And I think Hitchens, I think Peterson gets a lot of shtick over that idea that, he says, don't go out and criticize the world. Go home and tidy up your room.
Yeah.
But what people are missing there is what he's saying is, before you go out and criticize the world, tidy up your room, get your shit together, have a good foundation under yourself, under your thoughts, under everything. Have a good understanding of religion and science and everything else, and be fit to take on the world before you take on the world. Because if you try and take on the world from a position of standing on shaky ground, or if you're not entirely sure of why you think certain things, or if you're clinging on to an ideology, or you're more ego than self, or whatever way you want to phrase it, you're not in a position that you can take on the world, all right. But I mean, you're not going to
end well.
But see, that's the thing. Like, you just end up banging your head against a brick wall because it's too big, it's too complex, and you're too small and too insignificant. Especially when you're not on form,
shaky ground,
or when you're on shaky ground. Exactly.
Sure. Like, I know, definitely.
You said something there that reminded me of something about something Gabor Mate, I think, speaks of. What's his shtick? So his shtick is addiction and losing connection with yourself. No, I've lost it. It'll come back to me. In relation to making changes in the wider world and doing the work on yourself. Sorry, I brought myself back into the room. There we go. I've heard Mate asked a couple of times, because he's a world famous, world renowned, highly regarded child psychologist. He is often asked, by parents, what can they do to not mess their kids up either any more than they already have, or that they might do in the future. And his advice, I love it. It's you want to do right by your kids, do right by yourself.
Yeah. Well, that's it.
Investigate your own mind. Stop ruminating over whatever it is. Get rid of the fucking sugar addiction. If you're sculling 10 cans of Coke a day, if you're on Facebook every 15 seconds or whatever it is, get your own life in order, because that's the gift that you can give to your kids, because irrespective of what you tell your kids are going to absorb what you do.
Oh, monkey see, monkey do, isn't it?
100%.
Like,
you can tell them what you should be doing all you fucking want, but all that does is confuse them. Because they get...
And hence you fuck them up.
Absolutely, you know,
for sure.
Don't do this, don't do that, and don't do the other, as you do all three, and enjoy it, you know, with a smile on your face. Like. But there's something to that the internal work has to be done before any real kind of progression is made. You mentioned earlier as well about this idea of changing your thoughts and letting go of ideas. You've introduced me to a lot of new ideas, and it's hard to let go. Like, I find, like, I've given up. I was about to say I've found it hard giving up smoking. I'm off the fags fucking 7 years or something, but I can see how I could get addicted like that, like, do you know what I mean, straight away.
You started again.
Not even well, you'd have to start again, but you'd think I'd be free of it, but I'm not. Like, I mean, the part of me that loves to scull pints and smoke fags is very much still alive inside me. Do you know that kind of way? So it's hard. I've been trying to let it go, and I've been, do you know, I've tried not to fuel it. I remember seeing something, I think it was on the wall of your gaff, actually. It could have been the wolf.
Oh yeah.
And which one?
Inside every, well, it's an old Indian proverb, and it's a Native American Indian. He's talking to his child, and he's saying to the child that inside every man there's two wolves fighting. One is anger, greed, sorrow, resentful, all what we call negative things. The other is, you know, he's happy, he's peaceful, he's, you know, he's balanced or whatever. And the young child turns around to the grandfather and he says, you know, which wolf wins? And the Indian replies, the one you feed. So if you want to feed the negative side, if you want to feed that wolf, like, you're going to come out with negative consequences. If you want to feel the positive side, that's what you're going to get, like, you know. So the one that wins is the one you feed.
No, absolutely. And I think that's perfect for another perfect analogy for what we were talking about on the outset about ideas. So the ones that survive, whether they be good or bad, they're the ones you've given the most attention to.
Yeah.
And as I grew up, I didn't have science as a kid, because you don't know what science is. Science is something you do in secondary school.
Yeah.
Do you know, so all I had was religion, and for me personally, I never bought into it for a second. Even as a small child, it just gave too many questions. It answered nothing and threw up a whole load of questions, and I never really bought it. So I somehow came up staunchly atheistic, then was introduced to science. That was fucking fantastic. Went down a mad science rabbit hole, and that was great. Then met the usual suspects: Dawkins, Dennett, Harris and Hitchens, the so-called four horsemen of the anti-apocalypse. Big, major, well-known, the new atheists, they were called. They all had New York Times best-selling anti-religion books there, and they were brilliant because they were able to articulate with a scientific background everything that I knew was kind of bullshit from day one, and that was great. And then fast forward a fucking decade later, and I bump into yourself, and you introduce me to psychedelics and all the rest of it. The one thing that I was always squarely on with my atheism was, like, I could explain everything off in a scientific manner. The one thing that I couldn't was that it was in every culture, in every part of the world.
Yeah.
Like, so people separated by hundreds of thousands of miles of either ocean or mountain ranges or both, they mightn't have had the same gods, but they had very similar gods.
Yeah.
And I could never reconcile that. And then fast forward to the psychedelic experiences that you led me towards, and I've had to re-listen to everything that those atheist kind of guys had said before, and it was great. That there was a real learning experience. I've done a lot of that in the last year or two, and the couple of times I'd hear them, even Hitchens, who I fucking still idolize, he'll say things like, "Oh, but these are just myths."
Yeah.
And having had psychedelic experiences and having gone down the rabbit hole of mythology, basically, in no small part thanks to the likes of Joseph Campbell, Alan Watts and Jung and etc., to just pass that all off as just myths. It just seems so stupid coming from a guy who was so
intelligent,
such such a master, like, do you know what kind of way? But yeah, it's fascinating. It's fascinating to me how closed-minded I would have been, and simultaneously considered myself very open-minded.
Yeah.
What kind of pushback do you think? What pushback do you get? I get very little, but then again, and you're probably the same, because we're probably in our own little echo chambers a little.
Yeah, you probably would be, like, but yeah, I would to be honest, get very little. To be honest with you, most people would be more interested in the story that I'm telling, and you know, I'm not saying that they all walk away believing every word that came out of my mouth or whatever. And
well, experiencing is believing. That's what I found.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, no, that's the big thing. And I've, you know, there's been so many people that have, you know, as I said before on the last podcast, would have kind of, you know, had listen to this fucking hippie cunt, like, you know what I mean, and then had the experience, and, you know, full blown hippies themselves in, you know, 2 or 3 months down the line. Yeah, like, it's like there's not too much pushback, because the thing about it is now is that we're moving so far on and so advanced with the science along with it. It's not just people coming out of Peru talking about how they found God in the bottom of an ayahuasca cup.
Yeah, no, 100%.
The science is now, and although science doesn't describe it as in God, it doesn't at all. But I always get a good laugh out of when you're listening to scientists try and have the conversation, and the words that they're trying to use to not say spirit or to say like, and it's like so clunky, like, it's just like, they just say the word, like, it's all right, like, it's spirit, like, you're not gonna, you know. But then I suppose it's because of their work, and I'm sure there's still some, you know, biases and hurdles there that need to be gotten over, like, you know. But I've not really had much of a pushback on it really at all, like, you know. Like, people are always interested in the story, and listen, it's probably less and less. I probably tell that story about Peru now anyway, you know.
Of course.
But, you know, as I said, more and more, the science is now backing up what, you know, these experiences that people are having. And whether you want to call it spirit or your subconscious or whatever it is, the results are the same for everybody. There's a massive healing happening through them. There's a massive reconnection to nature and, you know, all of them things. Even if you walk out there and you still don't believe in God or don't believe in spirit, there's still a massive healing. So that outcome doesn't really matter. As long as the healing is happening and people are benefiting from it and people are beginning to examine their own lives and their own way of living, well, then it can only be positive, like, you know. So you know, there's not too many people that you talk to now that wouldn't. I suppose maybe the older generations who maybe, you know, aren't online as much as, you know, as we would be, or would have, you know, information to the likes of the John Hopkins studies and the likes of what MAPS are doing and different kind of organisations like that. I'm sure they probably are still, you know, living in that kind of dogmatic view from 60s America or 60s the world view, like that, you know, psychedelics are bad and they mess with you. And that is true if you don't give them the respect that they deserve. If you go in there, you know, any of the bad experiences that seem to happen with psychedelics are done in an environment where people are drinking and other drugs are being taken. And if you're to believe what the shamans are saying, and what I feel I've 100% experienced, that you are going to the spirit world, if you are drinking and at a house party where there's loads of music happening and, you know, everything's a bit bananas anyway, and you know, you take one of these psychedelics, you certainly are going to have a bad experience, aren't you? So to say that there's no bad experiences, you know, I wouldn't be honest if I say that, but they usually tend to revolve around either that scenario or a scenario where somebody may have underlying issues of psychosis or, you know, different breaks within their mind and things like that. They are examples of times where it can go wrong. And I think, you know, with a lot of these tests and stuff that are being done through the scientific avenue, they're very stringent on their testing and they're kind of, you know, making sure that nobody has any of that in their background or family background or things like that, you know. But yeah, so, which you know, it kind of is important, but again, are we in danger of, you know, I listen to the scientists and I 100%, I'm the first one to advocate safety and to do these in a ritual and a ceremonial setting, like, you know, I genuinely believe that that's how they should be done and that's how you'll gain the best benefit from them. But I sometimes feel when you're listening to the scientists, it's nearly like a mothering of it again. Like, oh, well, there's only a certain type of person that should be doing it, and we should be bringing them into a lab and doing it in a, in kind of that kind of control setting and things like that. But literally for thousands of years, we've done them where a shaman and his tribe have taken these sacraments together and had transcendent experiences. And I would be much more in line with that way. That's how I believe they should be done, and that's how I believe they should be conducted. Like,
Oh, look, I'm in complete agreement with you there, and I think any of the problems with psychedelics, like you mentioned there, taking them in the wrong type of setting, taking them in a house party or whatever else.
Yeah.
Or maybe taking far more than you thought you were taking, or any of these things. I've made those.
Like Paul Stamets taking 20 grams the first time and ending up a tree in a lightning storm.
Yeah, and
that's
cured the stutter, though,
yeah. Well,
hell.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd be prescribing that to everybody who's trying to cure a stutter.
No, and just to fill people in on that, like 5 grams is considered to be what's called a heroic dose. 5 grams of dried psilocybin mushrooms will give you an experience.
No, for sure.
There's no... You won't be left wondering whether or not you've been given a placebo or not. You'll get the full-blown experience. So what was it, 20 grams?
20 grams on his first time by complete accident, in fairness now. But, that just shows you by not doing the right research and the right understanding of it where it can go wrong.
Well, a big part of the problem is the fact that they're illegal.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
I mean, it's funny because I kind of copped you doing it, and it reminded me of how I've done it, explaining how a trip can go wrong at a house party or whatever else. But you'd never hear a doctor saying, don't take this entire packet of laxatives when you don't have constipation. Because, if you do, you're going to have a bad trip. No fucking shit, you're going to have a bad trip. You're taking X amount of dried grams of mushrooms in a setting whereby, you don't know where you are, you don't know, how you're going to get home, you don't know everybody in the building, blah, blah, blah. So if they were legal, I suppose, what would you... that's actually a good question, I think. If they were legal, what changes would you make, or what would the warning symbol be, or what would the warnings on it be, do you think, if it was legal?
Well, I get, it's like everything. Like, the best way to educate these people... the best way to educate people on these kind of things is when they're at their youngest. Instead of bringing kids into school and saying to them, I feel, with the whole kind of, drugs are bad thing. Like, if I'm honest, you go into school, you're told drugs are bad, you shouldn't do them, they lead to depression, they lead to anxiety, blah, blah, blah. You go out and you take drugs, and that does not happen the first time.
Absolutely.
Like, you go out and you take ease in a club, or you take whatever, and you have hands down the greatest night of your life. Like, you've a brilliant night, it's an incredible experience or whatever, like, so you're then left when you come down wondering, well, hold on a minute, sure, they told me this was all wrong and bad and all of that kind of thing, and it wasn't anything at all. So, what's all the lying for? What we need to do is educate people at a younger age and say, these are the effects of these drugs. This is what this drug does, and this is what that drug does. And all we can really do is educate people. And, as you said, if they are legalized, we have to explain to people, well, not we, like, but, as in society has to show people that these are the responsible ways, and these are some of the better ways to do it. And you're best going with people who've got experiences in doing them before, like, and I think that's what you do. You need to educate people as into the best ways, and we explain to them, well, look, these are how these tribes do it, and there's, that's one thing, as you spoke about religion and all that, we've lost all our rituals. We don't have rituals anymore, but these hunter-gatherers, this is always a ritual, ceremony that they're doing, like, and that is the best way to understand the divine and to come to these experiences. And, when you're doing it in that ritualistic thing, there's, you know what you're getting involved in, do you know what I mean? You know that you're going there to, experience maybe a different reality, or a different, well, certainly a different form of consciousness than your ordinary day form of consciousness. And by going and doing it in that ceremony, so you automatically, I think, are bringing a certain amount of respect towards it, like, but it's only through education that we can, help people to understand that, like, and help, I'm not so sure what you can put on a warning box, but it has to be educating kids in school and educating them properly on the right and wrong drugs. But all we can do is educate people, and again, then it's up to you to take your personal responsibility. You can either take heed of what the experienced people and the shamans and all of these are telling you, or you don't, and you go off and you take 20 grams for your first time and you make a mess of things. But exactly that. But all we can do, we can't tell people how to live their lives, and we can't tell people this is what's right for you, because what's right for you might not be right for me. All we can say is these are the experiences that people have had, and these are how people the majority of the time have good experiences on them. And I guess it's up to you then after that, really, isn't it? If you kind of go it that way, or you go your own way and, you know, maybe not have such a good experience, you know?
Oh, without a doubt. And I'm just thinking out loud there, on the back of what you were just saying, the idea of set and setting, if that was all that was taught in schools, you'd have a much better, you'd have a sort of healthier attitude towards drug taking.
Yeah.
So you don't have to teach people of the actual effects of each and every drug and how they could affect you, because drugs affect different people different ways for a start, nothing else. But if you just explain to them the idea of set and setting, you know, coffee is perfectly fine. It's you know, doesn't really do you any harm like anything else in moderation. It's, you know, perfectly good drug to consume.
Yeah.
Don't drink 4 cups of it before you go to bed, though.
Yeah.
Because, you know, you're going to have a bad time. Do you know the kind of way?
Yeah.
And it's the same with any drug, whether it's psychedelics or sugar or
even heroin.
caffeine.
Do you know what I mean?
Even
like, take heroin as an example. You can explain to somebody, and like, you'd want to be living under a rock at this stage to not know the negative effects of heroin, but people still take it. Like, there's nothing you can do to mitigate for that. Like, you can't, do you know what I mean? It's illegal, but people are still taking it or whatever. Like, if somebody wants to do something, this idea, and again, it kind of goes back to that, you know, that whole nanny state kind of a thing. Like,
yeah, very much so.
You know, these drugs are illegal and I can tell you what's right and wrong for you. Well, I can't, like, do you know what I mean? That's not what I'm here to do. Like, I can only say what's worked for me and what was right for me. That doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be right or wrong for you. Like, if somebody... knowing, as long as you know the full consequences of what you're doing, whatever the consequence of taking that drug, or do you know what I mean, then it's up to you as a sovereign person to make that decision for yourself, to then either take that drug or not take that drug. Like, you know, the idea that the government or any institutions are telling us that you should or shouldn't be able to do this or that is something I can't really wrap my head around. And like, even as you said earlier, like, these plants are illegal, and your cousin Porrick sent me a text message the other day, and we were just chatting about the trials that were happening in Dublin, and he literally just wrote into the message, he just says, the idea that any species on this planet is illegal, he says, I don't know what to think about that. There's a species, like, these things are a plant, they're a species, and we've now made them illegal, like, you know.
Yeah, Amanita muscaria grows in my front lawn.
Of course, well, it's illegal. Like, I wonder does the mushroom know it's illegal?
But I mean,
it makes no sense.
Even the active compound in ayahuasca, dimethyltryptamine, we produce it endogenously. It's in us all. Everyone listening to this, you're carrying an illegal narcotic on you at all times.
Terence McKenna says everybody's holding.
Everyone's holding, yeah.
That's it. Like, but you know, the idea that we've made these things illegal, and look, I do understand that they were made illegal at a time when, you know, people were abusing them and all of that kind of stuff. But to completely write them off, we're now getting a much better understanding and a picture. And hopefully, with the trials that are happening in Dublin and are happening kind of around the world, that these things, you know, will become available as a medicine, because that's what they are. And again, I'm fully in belief of that they are a medicine, like, you know.
Well, as you said, I think it was the first time, was it yourself that said that the difference between a medicine and a poison is dosage?
Yeah.
So they're medicines provided they're using the right set and setting.
Yeah,
so provided you're in the right mindset and you're in the right physical setting around you. And it's the same for laxatives and coffee and sugar and dimethyltryptamine and any drug.
But really, anything. But it's all drugs. Sugar, as you said, sugar, coffee, tea, you know,
music,
cannabis. Even. It's all you can use. Everything like that is really a drug, isn't it? Like, you know.
Well, my understanding of the best description of drugs that I've heard is anything that you can consume that will alter your consciousness. So that could be music or cocaine or anything in between, basically. And I've noticed it myself, and I've wondered, actually, have I an addiction to music? And I've wondered then, like, once you have that kind of a thought, it's like, am I addicted to music? It kind of throws up another thought, like, is there anything wrong with being addicted to music? But what I found is, I'm very, very, very rarely in silence. I'm either listening to a podcast or I'm listening to music.
But maybe what you're addicted to is being brought out of the very present moment.
Oh, without doubt.
That's the addiction that's the biggest addiction that the majority of the world are suffering from is that we're always so engrossed in the past or what's going to happen in the future, and a lot of times we don't want to sit in that silence and think about the pain and the suffering, so we'll do anything to not have to sit in that silence and not have that monkey mind running at 1,000,000 miles an hour. So we reach for the radio, or we reach for the can of Coke, which is the couple of minutes reprieve from that, or we, exactly that. And it's just constantly bringing you out of that present moment. And maybe that's what we're all addicted to. Maybe it's the silence, and that's sitting in that silence that we're all trying to so hard to avoid,
Oh, but without a doubt, and that's what social media is basically.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
Not only do you get rewarded from breaking away from being in the present moment, so you get that reward, but you also get the reward of, oh, there's a notification, or oh, there's a comment, or oh wow, look at that picture. It's really kind of low level satiation compounded on top of our deepest need as a human being, and urges and that.
And what's your take on social media and stuff like that? I know you're kind of like myself, you use it very infrequently or whatever, but it certainly seems to be fueling a lot of the ill health in the world, doesn't it?
I think so, yeah. I think I think the online world isn't the real world. I think the online world is the online world, and I think when it's looked at from a broad enough perspective, or when it's looked at from a distance, I think that it's kind of obviously a less fulfilling, more empty, more vacuous world or existence. And when you're in it, it's kind of hard to even notice it. But I think when you zoom out, I think when everybody, whenever they zoom out and look at it kind of objectively, they can see it's a bit of a cesspool. Course,
But I wonder, the worry I have is, are we going to zoom out? You don't need Elon Musk there the other day talking about, how they're using now this Neuralink thing, and it's implanted it in pigs.
Okay.
Have you heard any of this?
No.
So it's more or less kind of a Neuralink. So it's a device that's put into your brain. And I love the packaging behind it. It's going to help, paraplegics, and it's going to help people like that. And that's an incredible tool. But we're not going to stop there, though. Do you know what I mean? The internet was supposed to be, oh, sure, look, it's just all the information at your fingertips. Won't it be great? Yeah, but we're also storing all your data, your phone calls, your emails, everything you look up, all of that is being stored. Do you know what I mean? They always package technology as if it's the savior of the world kind of thing, and then we'll deal with the repercussions, like we're now seeing, with a lot of depression and anxiety amongst young kids and all of that. That's how we'll deal with that down the line. But I wonder, what's your take on technology, I guess, is what I'm asking, because sometimes I would kind of think to me, I love when you hear Rogan talk about how we're the sex organs for the machine world, and it's kind of going to take over, and the caterpillar is going to turn into this butterfly or whatever, and I'm going to go, sometimes I can kind of think like that, and then other times I'm thinking, oh, I'm not so sure. I don't know about that.
when Ivor McQuillan is shaking his head going, I'm not so sure. I don't know.
I'm like, ooh, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not so sure that it is going to be the savior. I don't know.
Oh no, it's the fucking Antichrist closer to the savior.
So.
I mean, we're barreling towards the end quicker than we've ever done before.
Well, it's that kind of line, isn't it? We're in a race to enlightenment or oblivion. And it's real shaky which one's going to win, isn't it, at the minute?
Yeah, well, look, I don't think we can cope with what we have.
Yeah.
So I think in relation to technology progressing at the rate that it's been progressing, I think we should just fucking steady on, lads. But again, I think the only thing that will change there is a change in the zeitgeist.
Yeah.
It's when the general consensus amongst human beings on the planet is, and it's funny because everyone on the planet can think, okay, lads, let's pull back on the advances. But if everyone goes out and buys the latest smartphone, you have to be congruent. So if the people collectively can stop buying into it, it's this whatever 7 odd billion of us, or the fucking, I don't actually know how many. It's not the 7 billion of us that are buying smartphones, but I wonder actually how many billion aren't. and that whatever amount of people aren't buying smartphones every year, that's going down.
Yeah,
in that kind of way.
yeah,
So
yeah.
take the 7 billion of us. If we could only get to some sort of broad consensus that, you know, the iPhone 12 is probably all right for 3 years.
I don't think it's going to happen though.
I don't think so either. Not immediately, but to me, that there's something in that though. That's the crux of fixing all our problems.
Yeah.
It's getting to the masses. It's getting it's getting in between the ears of every man, woman, and child on the planet.
Well, I think it's the chaos that gives us that. So, you know, with the pandemic, how we were kind of saying earlier, the world seems like it's a little bit in chaos or whatever. But, you know, the one thing that you're hearing repeatedly off people is that I've had that time during them couple of weeks where I sat at home and I reevaluate that, you know, my kids are the most important thing. This idea of doing a 60-hour work week and all of that, it's not working for me and it's not bringing happiness. But if the chaos of the pandemic hadn't have happened, the order wouldn't have arisen out of that, like, you know. And I suppose the way I kind of look at technology is technology will, like this idea of, you know, what's merging with AI and blah, blah, blah. Would be my belief that, you know, a cataclysm will stop that before it happens, because you only have to look back, like as far back as say like 1890 and what they call the Carrington event. I'm sure you've heard of that. No. So the Carrington event was now, God, I hope I'm right on this. It was a solar flare from the sun.
Okay.
And what it done was it was a mass ejection from the sun. And in 1819, we were only starting to get our telephone cables and all of that kind of thing. And it literally fried all the telephone cables.
An EMP, essentially, an electromagnetic pulse.
Exactly. And that literally happened in 1890. So if we had the exact same size mass solar flare at you know, today, it would literally wipe the grid out. Everything would be gone. And I would be a big, you know, believer of the ideas that constantly on this planet there's different cataclysmic events that kind of push us back and we start again and we rebuild, like, and it's, you know, in line with the ideas of, obviously, and influenced by the ideas of the likes of Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson and, you know, people like that constantly on this planet. We're living through a period of order for the last kind of 1,000 or 2,000 years, but like it's not always like that. Like there's constant, you know, whether it be like even in Greenland they're after finding a massive impact site for a meteor crater, which they found actually around February last year. And what they're saying is that impact, the oldest that impact crater could be, I think, is in around 2 million years, and the youngest they're kind of saying it could be is in the last 12,000 years. So within that window, but within that window, we've had a meteor impact. Like, you know, when you think of like a meteor impact on this planet, you tend to go back to, you know, 65 million years ago, and then the other big thing that I didn't realize until this one, this is only the 26th biggest crater that's ever been found. And I was like, hold on a minute, there's been 24 other massive impact craters on this planet. Like, I knew about the one from the dinosaurs.
Yeah. And
that was really it, like, do you know what I mean? I was like, I didn't understand, like, I didn't know that there was, you know, 26. And I would always wonder again if a conscious universe is kind of constantly playing this game. As soon as we get to a certain point in our advancement where things might start to go a bit wrong, is there a reset button that nature pushes? Is there a kind of a comet impact, or is there a volcanic eruption? And like, even when you think about Yellowstone National Park, like, that has a super volcano underneath it, and that erupts every, 500,000 years or something, or whatever the number is, but we're long overdue that eruption. And I would always kind of think to myself that, you know, the line of going down technology, it won't ever develop to where it, you know, destroys the planet, or where AI becomes, you know, the dominant consciousness on the planet, because I believe that nature will have reset things long before that gets to happen, you know.
And do you think that that's just because that's what seems to have happened, or because you think nature has a hand in kind of what goes on?
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Like, is the planet itself, I suppose that's a line of thinking that, now, I'm not saying I buy into that line of thinking, but that, you know, that Mother Gaia, that the planet itself is a conscious being, and that the whole of the universe is consciousness itself. You know, that the whole thing is conscious, and maybe it has a hand in, you know, in when certain planets, because it would be my belief definitely that there's other planets that are definitely have other life forms on them.
It kind of stands to reason, though, doesn't it?
To me it seems implausible that there wouldn't be, like, you know, when you think of the sheer number of planets that we're now even finding within our, you know, whether it be our solar system or galaxy, that are, you know, in the Goldilocks zone, you know, it seems to reason that there should definitely be life on other planets, doesn't it?
Oh, without a doubt. Like just to make sure we're not losing too many people on the Goldilocks zone. So if a planet is within, like, for a start, we used to think that planets were rare because we couldn't see them basically when we looked up at the night sky. Now we reckon that pretty much all the stars that you can see at night have a handful of planets rotating around them in their orbits. So the Goldilocks zone is a planet, or a planet basically that's close enough to its star that it's orbiting that there's liquid water on it, but not so close that it just basically boils it all off. So that's the Goldilocks zone. But outside of the Goldilocks zone, even in our own solar system, you've got the moons of Jupiter, and one of them, Europa, is a snowball basically. It's just a big ball of ice. I'm not sure if there is any rock at the center of it, but it's a ball of ice, and it actually has what look like volcanoes to us, big geysers of ice that's under pressure being released. But the interesting thing about it is that because it's a moon of Jupiter and it orbits Jupiter, because Jupiter is so massive, it's, I don't know, 1,000,000 times bigger than the Earth, or maybe not quite that big, but it's colossal, like it's 100 times bigger than Earth. And because its orbit is so close, imagine if you're holding a tennis ball and you give it a bit of a squeeze and you let go, and you give it a bit of a squeeze and you let go. That's what happens to the moon as it orbits Jupiter, and that squashing and loosening heats it up. So it has, we've theorized within reasonable certainty that it has oceans.
Right.
So it's outside of the Goldilocks zone. So it's not close enough to its nearest star to have liquid water from being heated by that star, but it can have liquid water through another heating process.
Right.
So whatever about the billions of stars and the 100 billions of planets that are in our own galaxy, never mind other galaxies, in our own back garden, we could have literally whales and like enormous sea creatures. That use either the same DNA as us or a completely different form of DNA. We are completely clueless to what goes on beyond this planet, and what we've learned has been just so fucking recent. Like, even the dinosaurs being wiped out by the comet. Like, everyone kind of takes that for granted now. Everybody knows and it's done and dusted. But I have a dinosaur book at home that I was given by my mum and dad. Like, I'm 35, so it wasn't any longer ago than that. And on the there's a paragraph in it where it speculates how some fringe scientists think that the dinosaurs were wiped out by a massive meteor impact, and they have a picture of some meteor impact in Arizona or something, not the actual one. So it's only within the last 20 years that we've actually realized that what killed out all the dinosaurs and everything else during that period was a cataclysmic event. And more recent than that, we're finding out that this type of cataclysm happens kind of all the time. And there's been what are they known as the Great Five Dyings in Earth's history. Pretty much all life on Earth has been more or less eradicated 5 times.
Right.
One was a coal deposit got caught on fire, basically, and just filled the world full of smoke, and it just killed 99% of life on Earth. The other one was the comet that killed the dinosaurs that landed in the Chicxulub crater. And there's a handful of others. I think there was could have been a global warming event. Again, this could be an ice age or 2 even. But these things seem to be far more the norm than the exception, and we're only literally finding out about them now. So who the fuck knows?
Well, if you look across all of the different cultures and stuff like that, that's what they're constantly talking about. Like, they're constantly talking about, you know, these cataclysmic events, and they're a resetting of the whole kind of thing. Like, you know, and when you even look across, you know, whether it be, you know, the Hindus, the Greeks, whether it be the Mayans, the Incas, they all talked about time as in it's a cycle of time. So everything is a cycle, like, you know, whether it be, you know, from night to day, you know, the year cycle and all that. But they say that, you know, they all, and again, as you spoke about with mythology, all cultures that would have been thousands of miles apart with no real way of contacting each other or sharing this knowledge, apparently, all kind of, you know, having different myths and stories about times of, you know, rises and falls in consciousness, and this is brought about by exactly that, cataclysms. And, you know, to maybe pick one of them and say it, because the one I'd probably know the most about would be the Hindu one, and they call that the Yuga cycles. And what they say is that within the Yuga cycles, there's a 26,000 year cycle that's happening on the planet. And it's kind of, so how the Hindus call it is the Yugas, how the Mayans and the Romans and things call it was the Great Year. So it's kind of a 26,000 year cycle, and it's, you know, a golden age is golden, silver, bronze, and iron. Or within Hinduism, they've got the 4 different yugas, and what we are now in is the Kali Yuga. And what they say is that is a time when we're, you know, when the world is kind of in chaos and we're kind of disconnected from spirit or whatever. But as we move up into, say, the next age or whatever, we become much more. So what you're having, like, say, for example, meditation, or to use psychedelics, to get to them realms is a much easier kind of, you know, scenario. You might not need the psychedelics, or you might not need the meditation by the time you get to the golden ages. And by the time the golden ages are happening, we're building kind of things like the pyramids, or, you know, Göbekli Tepe, and all of these kind of stone monuments that they really don't have a way of kind of really dating, other than by, you know, dating the carbon materials that are around them. So they don't really know how old the pyramids are. And, well, look, there's different, you know, there's different lines of thinking of when they were built, and, you know, the Sphinx and, you know, all of that kind of stuff that the likes of Graham Hancock and that would talk about. But within, again, to go back to the, you know, the 26,000 year cycle, it's all to do with the pull of the planets, and it's the planets going through the zodiac signs on the world. But they will kind of say that it's a constant rise and fall in civilization. Like this idea that, you know, time is linear, and we, you know, turn from monkeys to where we are now, flying through the sky and putting podcasts through the air. You know, what a lot of these kind of older tribes and cultures would talk about is that there's peaks and troughs, like, do you know what I mean? Like that we rise up and we hit, you know, advanced civilizations, and then there's a cataclysmic event, like, you know, a meteor impact, or a, you know, a volcano hits, or an ice age, and it's a constant. So instead of time being linear, it's a constant rising and falling in consciousness, rising and falling in consciousness. But every culture across the world has spoken about these and has them in their myths and their legends. And again, as you said, you know, with the atheists and stuff like that, like they kind of say, oh, which the myths don't really mean much or whatever. But I think what we're kind of now beginning to see from the different evidence, especially with the that LiDAR, is we're starting to see a very, very different planet than we ever imagined. Like even when you go into the jungles in Guatemala, see that the cities that they're after finding.
I have very vaguely now.
Yeah, so
I must actually talk to Mr. Murphy, our good friend Anthony Murphy, about that.
Yeah, that'll be very interesting. They like what they're kind of saying now is that at a time when these monuments were being built, they were kind of saying that whole area was no population, there was, you know, nothing really happening. Europe was the epicenter of the world, and, you know, them kind of surrounding areas. And now what they're finding is like that there was cities that were built up there that at one stage would have housed 10 million people, like between 5 and 10 million people over a, you know, couple of 100 years, like. But
primitive hunter-gatherers.
Primitive hunter-gatherers. Yeah, the same primitive hunter-gatherers that, you know, built Göbekli Tepe and places like that. Like even when you it certainly seems like there's a case to be made for all of that. And the more you look at the evidence, like even, you know, from my own experience in Peru, being up around Machu Picchu and stuff like that, they've got like these massive stone blocks that look like they were laser cut. And they're the best stones. They're the best monuments that are there. And then it seems like somebody came along and built on top of that. And the buildings that are on top of that are much cruder, much less done by less, you know, skilled architects or whatever.
Yeah,
you know
demonstrably what I mean?
So, like. And like by a country mile, just, you know, look up, there's work by a guy called Brian Forrester, and he goes into the likes of Machu Picchu and different places, and he kind of shows you that kind of thing, or, you know, Pumapuca, places like that they're now finding, where these things are laser cut. Like some of them rocks that are done like a hexagon. And they're trying to tell you that was done by a stone hammer and a chisel and rubbing sandpaper off it, and that's how they got them.
By people who didn't have the wheel.
I know, and these things look like they're laser cut. You can't even fit. They're so tightly cut to each other that you can't even fit a sheet of paper through them.
Yeah.
That's how well they're done. And to me, that's a massive indication that where I do kind of tend to lean towards the ideas of rises and falls in consciousness and these cycles that happen on the planet. And it's, you know, if for instance, if the Carrington event that happened in 1819 that wiped out our electricity grids, if that happened again today, who do you think would be the people that would survive that? The people who are going to survive that are going to be the hunter-gatherers. And the hunter-gatherers are going to be the one that restarts humanity again, because bar a handful of people on the planet, well, not a handful, I'm sure there's quite a few, but like, there's not too many people that can go out and hunt their own food, that can grow their own crops, and can do that in a space of time that if a cataclysm happens, you need to be able to do that within 5 or 6 days, or you're not eating, because there's no food going to the shops, there's no refrigeration, there's no nothing, and the vast majority of us would not survive the first year of a cataclysm.
But I'd have some chance, you'd have some chance, because we live out in the country and we have gardens,
fish in my
just
lake.
for a start, and there's fish in your lake.
Yeah.
But if you were in a 2-bed apartment in Finglas,
big time, yeah. But even me, as in, I have a garden, but I don't know how to grow crops yet.
Yeah,
like I'm on the stepping stones to, like, I want to get my polytunnels up next year and get all of that kind of going. But if it happened tomorrow,
where would you
I'm as dead as the next. I was just about to say,
you wouldn't get them on Amazon.
Exactly. There you go. So it's, what these cultures and tribes all talk about is it always goes back to the hunter-gatherers. It's the hunter-gatherers that restart humanity. And then you have to look at, say, the art that's on some of the cave arts, or you look at the lines, the Nazca lines and stuff like that, like where they definitely look like they've drawn aeroplanes, or they've drawn things like that into it. And what would the hunter-gatherers who've never had any talk was, like, take for example them hunter-gatherers that were out in the Amazon rainforest. I remember we were flying over them and they were throwing spears at the aeroplane.
Yeah.
So if something happens,
uncontacted people.
Yeah, uncontacted people. Like, so if they're then going in having that experience and then drawing that on walls, and then people are coming back years later and seeing this and they're like, yeah, but you're like, they were primitive people, they didn't have that technology. Or has that technology been wiped off the planet at countless different times through, even to take the Great Flood that's in the Bible, there's something like 300 different cultures and religions that all talk about a great flood, that are separated by thousands of years and thousands of miles and not being able to be in contact with each other. Is it a myth, or is it something that is, a constant cycle on this planet? Does consciousness rise and fall, over time, like, constantly, and we build and we start again? Like, you even look at the Egyptian pyramids and things like that. The idea that they were built by, primitive people, like, you even look at the statues and the monuments and the different temples that are built around that.
I've been there, man. Been to Cairo, been to Giza, like.
And correct me if I'm wrong on this, the 3 temples of Giza are the first 3 pyramids to be built. And all the other ones around it are the after ones, and they've progressively got worse.
Is that's the
and again,
line.
I hope I'm right on that. Like, and if if I am right on that, how does that fit into our narrative of a linear timeline? Surely we should be starting off building the shitty pyramids first, and then they progressively get better and better, and then we build the three pyramids in Giza, instead of it progressively getting worse. Like.
No, without a doubt. I think another thing that's relevant here is our perception of time. So I think these days today, I'm living till 5 o'clock till you come, and then it's till 7:30 that the training starts, and then it's 7 o'clock the kids have to go to bed, and we tend to think in immediate terms.
Yeah.
Like, me thinking ahead is like 2 or 3 months. I might sit down with myself and try and work out a holiday or a time off or whatever. But you don't end up building a pyramid with that kind of a mentality.
Yeah.
Do you know that kind of way? Like, nobody that started the pyramid was around, well, at least as far as we're aware, was around when it was finished, because it just took so long to build them. Now, having said that, we don't know how they did build them. So who knows? Maybe they did just whip them up in a weekend.
Yeah.
Like.
But it was that maybe the pyramids being built in as a lot of these tribes and cultures kind of talk about, a golden age where these things were much easier to build. They were much more in tune with nature and with the laws that we say govern the universe. Maybe they had ways, like you're talking about, like the biggest pyramid in Egypt is 2.5 million stones that all got brought from one part of Egypt to the other. That's a massive undertaking.
To just get that amount of rubble from one pile to another pile is unimaginably difficult.
Yeah.
But to build a pyramid out of it.
Yeah. But where they, where are these monuments, are they markers from a more advanced time? And look, these are only ideas that I enjoy talking about them, and I can't say either one way or the other, do you know what I mean? But it certainly makes for interesting reading, and it certainly seems a lot more plausible than the idea that it was slaves that built the pyramid. And like, sure, even the idea that the pyramids are built at 0.0 or 0.2 of a degree off perfect north. With our best lasers, we can do it at 0.5 or 0.6 of a degree off perfect north. And yet you're trying to say that these are primitive people. So how are they able to build them to a better degree than we can, like,
Oh no! Look, without a doubt, and I think most of the ancient monuments are all astronomically aligned to some degree or another.
Yeah.
I mean, take Newgrange, our closest example. That it's not by accident that the sun shines straight through and illuminates that path at the shortest day of the year.
Well, Anthony Murphy, it's funny because I heard Anthony Murphy on a podcast after he was on here. I just went out having a little look around and see what I could see of his stuff, like, and he was talking about how in Newgrange that every 8 years or something, or every 9 years, Saturn shines through that chamber.
Okay.
You can see Saturn from that chamber. That couldn't be a fluke, like, that Saturn shines in through that chamber
on the shortest day of the year. Or
yeah, I'm to be honest, I'd have to re-listen to the podcast or whatever. Like, but it's once every 8 years, Saturn shines in through that window. Like, like, that's a hell of a coincidence. If if it just you know what I mean, if it's there. Like, you're looking at, even they're talking about how Newgrange and stuff was built as a marker, like, for farmers and things like that, so that they knew when to plant their crops and the solstice and stuff like that. Even that in itself is an incredible feat, to be able to build something that on 2 days of the year, or is it even 1 day of the year?
Sure, I think it's the shortest day of the year. Yeah,
that the sun shines in through that through that chamber, like, But if you listen to kind of the hunter gatherers, or people who come from tribes and stuff like that, they would say that that's not what that is at all. Like, they were saying that was if you think about it, you're brought into the womb of Mother Earth. So that was a structure and a monument that was built, and you were brought in there to have. It could have been a psychedelic experience. It could have been through the use of mushrooms, or it could have been through meditation. But you go into the darkness, and you've obviously been in Newgrange yourself.
Yeah.
So when you go in there, it's pitch black dark, and what they say is you go in there for a shamanic ceremony. So whatever the drug, or whatever whatever lights the paper, whether it be the psychedelic or whatever way they done it, whether it be drumming or fasting or whatever. But you went in there and you had an experience of the divine, a transcendent experience. And then when you come out through that passage, so that's like the womb. So you're coming out through the womb and you're coming back out. So it's a rebirth. It's a rebirth. But again, through all the different cultures, they've all, as you said, they've aligned all these things to the stars and to the cosmos and to all of them kind of things. And it definitely alludes to the fact that they're pointing to the stars, to them, circles of time, and what's the word I'm looking for?
Not epochs or
no. Cycles. That's the cycles. So it's certainly alluding to cycles of time, that they were so engrossed in what was above that they they built these things on the earth as a mirror image, and maybe they've built these things as markers for us to keep watching these things and to start to understand the celestial part of the world. Like, maybe as I said with the yuga cycles and stuff, maybe we're down in deep in the material realm right now, and maybe as we move out of that, and they when you listen to the Hindus and stuff, there's a big thing saying that we're coming out of that. What the Kali Yuga is, what the others would call kind of the not the Bronze Age, so iron. So the Iron Age would have been the lowest, but we're literally coming out of that. And maybe that's, some of the chaos you're now starting to see in the world, whether it's, the massive change in the weather, or whether you're starting to see, the riots. There's certainly an unease in the world, like, and maybe that is what's happening, because they say when you move from one stage to another, there's a 300-year window where chaos reigns, and out of the chaos comes order, and you move into the next stage, or the next kind of, part of it, like,
Yeah, no, without a doubt. And in keeping with your chaos and order idea, and what you mentioned earlier about flood myths that are ubiquitous across cultures and across time, it's not so much that it's that a flood is coming. It's less, sorry. it's less to do with the fact that there either is a flood or that there's a flood coming, and much more to do, if not entirely to do, with ark building. So the way I like to conceptualize it is that you build your own ark. I think Peterson actually talks about this. The idea is you build your own ark for the impending flood.
Right.
The impending flood could be a pandemic, it could be an EMP, it could be your kid dying, it could be, there's no limit to what that could be for everyone or for each individual. But the idea is that you build your ark, and the proper way to do that is to have spent time working on yourself and exercising your own demons and being comfortable in your own skin and trying to get out of all those negative thought patterns that you kind of can drive yourself crazy. But the idea being that, and again, this happened across cultures, was there's always some sort of a danger coming, whatever that is, whether it's a cataclysm or cancer, it doesn't matter. There's shit coming. There might be shit coming at you now, but there's shit on its way. So prepare yourself, in body and mind and spirit, if you can somehow separate those three things.
But maybe that's what, as we said earlier, it's no coincidence that the psychedelics are now coming out teaching us a way to get back to nature. Even I would always believe that everything has its good and bad. So as much as we talked about the bad parts of technology, there's some really good parts of technology, because the majority of us you wouldn't have done so much self-inquiry had you not have listened to Jordan Peterson or Alan Watts or people who are on the Joe Rogan podcast.
If I know access to the internet,
of course. So what I'm, again, I suppose what I'm saying is that everything has its good and its bad, and it doesn't, and maybe that's what we're now being prepared for. Maybe it's no coincidence that we're having a re-emergence of the psychedelics. We're having through technology, we're all starting to kind of, look within ourselves, and maybe there is a massive change coming in the paradigm. Maybe, we're going to teach our kids a completely different way. And even to the point, in work today, I was kind of listening to the lady talking, and we're saying how different fathers are now. Fathers, I know with my own dad and that, my dad was, so busy with work and stuff like that. He worked hard, and that was that generational thing, where this generation of where we've come up and we seem to be spending, fathers are much more hands-on and things like that, aren't they?
I think so, than previous generations,
than previous generations. And that's where I kind of see the hope out of chaos, because I would definitely be, I'm not a pessimistic person. When I talk about chaos, again, I think you need chaos for order to grow from. Do you know what I mean? So I'm always optimistic, and that's what I like to think of when I think of the current maybe chaos that we're in, that maybe it is part of these massive cycles of time, and maybe we're on the upswing, or we're going towards the upswing, and the psychedelics, the technology, all of that is kind of fueling that upswing now, that we're all doing real deep looking within ourselves,
No, absolutely. And you've made me think of something that you might be able to help me walk through, actually, because you might remember, was it last year or the year before, a gang of lads lifted 2 ATM machines out of banks in Kells. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Blocked off the roads. Yeah. What was it? They stole JCBs that were on the back of trailers.
Yeah.
Pulled into the town, blocked off the roads with the trailers,
right.
Proceeded to pull the ATM machines out of the walls with the JCB or whatever it was. Meanwhile, they'd put hollow nails under all the cop cars in the surrounding stations, so when the alarm was rang, the cops went and had flat tires, whatever else. And the next day when the story broke, I heard a lot of people saying that the boys were kind of heroes. They were elevated to this. Fucking fair play to the lads. Imagine having
Robin
the balls
Hoods.
to do that. Yeah, that's the other way. It's fucking nasty bastards. You wouldn't want them minding your kids of an evening, But it got me thinking about how, and this isn't to absolve the guys who lifted those ATMs or people who do bad things generally, but I feel like if a society becomes too something, I don't know, it depends. So in historically, it would be if the king was too tyrannical,
out of balance, really, isn't
out of balance. And if there was too much pressure put on the population, I feel like something gives. So to use a balloon as an analogy within an analogy,
you love an analogy.
I do love me an analogy. But if you squeeze a balloon, it doesn't pop uniformly. It pops at a weak point. And I wonder, is that weak point, is the pin that pushes in and creates that weak point, is that caused by the pressure? Because you can press a pin into a balloon, and if it's not under pressure, it will pop.
Yeah.
But if your society is like a pressure cooker environment, you're going to have people lifting ATM machines out
and
of
rioting,
banks,
like we're seeing,
and rioting, and all the rest of it. So that's a direct cause to the pressure that the society has been put under.
No, for sure, definitely. Like the idea that, you know, what's happening in, and we say America, but it's happening in different countries around the world as well, like, you know. But, you know, to say what's happening over there is just race, I feel is wrong. There's certainly race issues there, and we're seeing, you know, how racism is playing out in that country. But it is exactly that too. It's, if you put that pressure on people, and then you put, you know, economic pressures on people, and, you know, we all see the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, eventually there's going to be some blowback, isn't there? There's going to be some kind of, people are eventually going to have enough. Then you throw in a pandemic on top of that, where people aren't, you know, able to work, where you're not able to make money, you know, you're probably in danger of losing your house. And as far as I'm aware, that situation isn't as bad here as it is in America. But you're kind of starting to see, it's never, for me, it's never really just an either or answer. Like, do you know what I mean? It seems to be like there's so many kind of things that are being thrown into the pot now, and you're about to see the chaos explode out, aren't you? Like, you know, like, it seems to be that, you know, they're rioting on mass scales over there, and it's, you know, things don't look too good over there. And that's, I suppose, why I say, you know, the world is in chaos. But I think, you know, as we become more aware, you know, through the internet and through things like that, of how these kind of institutions are making their money and have making their money, you know, like, we've got oil, we've got, you know, big banks, you've got all of them kind of things. And it certainly is, you know, it's certainly laying the soil for people, you know, to grow ideas of anger and resentment out, isn't it? Like, you know, because the more you oppress people, there's always going to be a pushback, isn't there? And I think we could be starting to see that, and I think that's where the chaos is going to come. But again, I'm always positive about that. I think out of the chaos will grow order, you know.
No, without a doubt. But I think we're ramping up the chaos to get order in a way that I wish we could, I don't know, maybe reassess what we're doing, and not need for it to all come crashing down, because it all coming crashing down is, you know, tens,
not
if not,
good.
but
No, it's not good.
but it's not good to the tune of tens of millions, if not
Oh,
hundreds of millions
billions,
of people
if not,
starving to death
if
or
not
being killed in
billions,
war
if
or
not
whatever
billions,
else.
yeah. But maybe, you know, it may be, again, to go back to, and again, I'm not saying this idea, the Yuga cycles and the Great Year and all that, I'm not saying it's correct. It's just ideas I'm talking about. But if you're to go back to that, that's what they say happens. They say for that 300 years between one move from the Iron Age into that Bronze Age, or from the Bronze Age into the Silver Age, there's 300 years of chaos. So the chaos reigns, and then the world comes back out. It's nearly, you know, to go back to the mythology of the whole thing, like on Joseph Campbell will talk that the rising of the phoenix from the flames. Sometimes the world has to burn, and within Hindu mythology and things like that, you know, you've got Shiva, and Shiva is the destroyer, but he's also the bringer of new worlds. And it's only out of death and destruction does new life get bred into things, like, you know.
But wasn't that the idea of sacrifice originally? Was that you didn't have to, you know, the town didn't have to burn to the ground. You could, you know, light a virgin on fire, and that would kind of suffice. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not, I don't want to bring that back, but the mentality that brought it about,
that doesn't work, I don't think. Like, but because nature, you know, nature itself, like, when you look throughout nature, you look at, you know, even say forest fires, like when you have forest fires over in the likes of Australia and the Amazon and things like that, like, out of that grows a whole new layer of life that comes through that, like, you know. So
from a natural
fire, or whatever, like, you know what I mean? Like, and I think maybe that plays out through nature in these massive cycles of time, like, you know, every so often the earth gets scorched and we rebuild again, and, you know, consciousness comes again, like, you know. But I find ease with that. Like, that's not something that scares me, because I would be one who believes that, you know, consciousness is not created within the body. Like, for me, consciousness, it leaves the body and still exists. So the idea of death, that's not a worry to me, or it's not something I'm saying as in it's in a bad thing. It's certainly, you know, if you're somebody who has a fear of death and who believes that, you know, the end is the end, then it would be something, I'm sure, that scares you. But for me, you know, I would buy into the idea that the Hindus would have, like, and it's called, they call it Leela, and it's that the whole world is just a drama, and you are merely an actor that's playing within it. And you're just playing a role, and somebody has to play the good guy, somebody has to play the bad guy, and it's just a big drama that's happening. But consciousness goes on after here, and it comes on before here, like, you know.
And I think I can't remember if we covered this in previous episodes, or if we've even spoken about it much. But are you a proponent of the idea that the brain, as opposed to a generator of consciousness, are you a proponent of the idea that the brain, as opposed to generating consciousness like a generator generates electricity? Do you view the brain more so as a TV set with a receiver of consciousness?
Yeah, I think in one of our last podcasts, when I was saying it, I made a mistake. I said it was a generator of consciousness, but what I actually meant is, what I would believe by it is that it's a receiver of consciousness. Like that the body and the brain is just, it's a form you take on to experience this material realm. But when you leave here, your consciousness, that awareness that we keep talking about, when the ego dies, the awareness, you know, transcends, and that would be my belief on it. Like, and
okay,
again, because I feel I've experienced that through my experiences with ayahuasca and with psilocybin mushrooms and things like that.
So sorry to cut across you, but just so I get this straight in my own head. And again, I know I'm not trying to nail you down on anything too specific here. I get that this has to be kind of kept broad and general. But do you think that, let's say, a newborn baby has the biology and the physiology within its skull and throughout its nervous system, say, to pick up consciousness, but it just doesn't have an ego? It hasn't developed an ego yet.
I think the ego would obviously develop through life experiences and through learning language and through, you know, different experiences. I would think, you know, when it comes here, it's the higher consciousness that comes, and then all of a sudden, you know, the ego will kick in then, I suppose, you know, as you begin to learn and evolve and grow through the world and stuff, and you take on an identity. You know, as soon as I think ego is probably created as soon as language is learned, is what I feel, because again, the ego is the thinking mind. Do you know what I mean? It's the thinking mind that gets everything done, and it's the way we're able to experience the world through thought and through things like that. And I would think that it's as soon as you begin to learn language that the ego kicks in. But I would still believe that you've got awareness from the minute you're conceived. Like, you know, I would say that there's an awareness there.
Well, there certainly is, because like an infant will know it's in danger.
Oh yeah.
Like, you know, if you put an infant into, you know, a basket with a cuddly toy and it's well fed and the room is dim and everything's nice and quiet, you know, odds are it'll be okay.
Yeah.
But you put that same infant into the corner of a teenager's band practice, and all of a sudden, like, that kid knows something's not right. Like, you know, it knows the, even just that, the fact that it knows anything about
it's a feeling, isn't it? It's just because it's getting a feeling. And, you know, if you're to go down, you know, the thinking of, you know, the likes of Nikola Tesla and people like that, like, where they say that everything is just really energy and frequency. So vibrations, exactly. So what the baby would be picking up on is, you know, as you said, if you put the baby in a room and you stick a wolf in the room, what you and me might be looking at is a baby and a wolf in a room, but everything is just kind of vibrations and frequencies happening off each other. So the baby knows that there's danger because of the frequency of the room. Now, I would know very little about that, and it'd be, you know, I certainly wouldn't like to talk too much about it, because I don't fully understand the idea that everything is like, what I think they would say is that everything is just energy, and that matter is energy vibrating at a denser frequency than the spirit world. Do you know what I mean? That kind of, and I've probably butchered that in a way, but I suppose what I'm saying is that the child is, instead of using the ego to think out the logic of it, is more resonating with the frequency that the wolf is a bad energy, or do you know what I mean? It knows that there's danger there because it's a certain energy. Everything is energy.
It's like a primordial feeling or an instinct, I suppose. That's the other thing. Like, Jung spoke a lot about the collective unconscious.
Yeah.
How familiar are you with that? Would you do you think?
Ooh, you see, again, not much. I know a little bit on it, and it's, you know, the bits I would know in it is that, you know, he would have spoke as if we need to go through a dark night of the soul, that collectively a species needs to go through a dark night of the soul where all its shadow sides are laid out bare, and that's where you heal them and stuff like that, as far as I know.
Sorry, do we have to do that collectively? Was the dark? I thought the dark night of the soul was an individual.
It's an individual thing, but you also go through it as collectively as a species, as far as I'm aware. And you'd wonder, is that what's playing out in front of us now? Do you know, like you're seeing a divide all across the world, and we're beginning to see, you know, a lot of them negative things brought to the forefront, and maybe as a species we have to face all that and more or less own our shit before we can move to the next level of consciousness.
Yeah, I'm with you, brother. Our fucking reminder for training is just after popping up.
No,
we're going to have to get you back to finish it off. If we'll ever get to the end of it, I don't know, but I'm certainly enjoying the fucking ride.
No, for sure, absolutely. And what I love about sitting and talking to you is I always have to think when I'm talking to you, like I can't talk bullshit, like I have to, but that's what I love about it, is that I can listen back to that and say, listen to this again and say, well, maybe I'm wrong on that, maybe I'm right on that, like, you know, maybe that's the good thing about having a conversation where you're both open to having that conversation, isn't it? Like,
no, without a doubt. I'm looking forward to getting you back now all the more, because I was really looking forward to sitting down and talking to you, because I just knew what to talk about wouldn't be an issue, because there's just so much crossover. Well,
we're more friends now, I think. You know, the first two podcasts, we didn't really know each other other than, you know, probably meeting each other 2 or 3 times, like, but now, you know, we're around each other, I would feel a lot more comfortable. You know, there's not the, you know, them spaces and that, geez, what do I need to say next? Like, it seems to flow, which is enjoyable, definitely.
You just reminded me about herself, or the wife as she's otherwise known now. You would have met herself, and when you arrived up to the house, I must actually ask her about this, because I would have gotten some friend of Dave's who was painting his house, went to the jungle, did a load of drugs, was coming here, and, you know, we were going to talk for fucking a couple of hours, and she would have went, right, you know, close the door on your way out, kind of thing. But like, this time around, she's been in your house, we've had a meal together, like, you know, like, in a way.
I can imagine her just going, Fran, this podcast isn't going to lead to a load of weird people like that right now, is it?
Exactly.
Because I'm going to put my foot down.
Speaking of introduce me to weird people, Porrick Riley is, I'm hoping to get him on, if not this week, next week. So that'll be good. Yeah,
Porrick is one of the good things that, you know, one of the best things that's happened me out of this podcast is that people have got in contact with me, you know, and I've become friends with them, like, you know what I mean? Like, I've, you know, I've so much time for Porrick. I can't wait to hear the podcast with him. I'd say, definitely one to tune into, that's for sure.
No.
He's a good guy, that's for sure. And then your cousin Peter as well, too, really good. And people I'm in contact with now, probably once or twice a week, like, now mostly through messages, or Peter would have been down at my house and things like that, like, and I would have never met them people if it wasn't for this podcast. So the sense of community that can come from this podcast, I think, is absolutely brilliant. And, you know, it's great to see you doing what you're doing and having these conversations with people, because I definitely think people are interested, that's for sure.
Look, it's great to be back, and it's great to have people like yourself in particular to talk to. It just makes the whole thing an absolute pleasure. Ivor, we'll wrap it up with that, because we have to get back to training. We're doing a bit of MMA training every Tuesday and Thursday, 7 to 8. If anyone in the Mead area is on for it, send us a message.
No samurai warriors are at now, don't bother coming.
But yeah, man, look, we'll get you back on within hopefully the next fortnight or so, and we'll fucking take it from there.
No bother at all, brother.
Pleasure. Cheers, man.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
But before I let you go, I'd just like to remind everybody that this episode and all the episodes on YouTube have been brought to you by past guest and friend of the show, Pat McKeown. Pat is very similar to myself insofar as that he's long had an interest in the mind, and more specifically the brain, and how they both interact, to such an extent that he went and spent 4 years getting a degree in neuroscience, and then spent a further year in getting a master's in psychology. Now, what he's done is pretty fucking cool. He's after setting up his own YouTube channel. It's called Pat Psychology Masters, and there's a link in the description. Now, what he's done here is he's uploaded all the best bits that he's learned over the last 5 years and put them into short, plain English, easy to understand YouTube videos for the likes of myself. His YouTube channel has been a massive resource for me in understanding both my mind and the mind of others. So hit up Pat Psychology Masters YouTube channel, subscribe, give it a like and a comment and a share. All that kind of stuff helps, and I'll chat to you soon.